We need just a few more minutes to finish up Unit 20. Unit 20 is it's kind of scary when you think about all the environmental issues that are out there, all the concerns that are out there. So we talked specifically about some concerns, mold, asbestos, radon, things like that. And guys, remember, we're not experts in these unless you're certified and trained. But otherwise, we're not. So I'm not walking into a house and going, oh my goodness, there's mold. You need to remediate. I'm going in and saying, my little red flag just went up. I think you should investigate. I think you should learn more. And we're going to get more and more into this idea of the red flags, material facts, that kind of thing. Quick question for you guys before you start writing down every single word on this slide. Pull up a chat, do a private chat because I want to hear from everybody. Let's check in via chat. Everybody ready? Private message just to me. When it comes to lead-based paint, what's the year we need to know? When it comes to lead-based paint, anything built prior to, look at you guys go. Were y'all ready for me? Y'all type fast. And this is a check-in. So even if you don't know, tell me you don't know, because this is how I'm taking attendance this morning. Maddie, can you call in on your phone for another device? Everybody in? So when it comes to lead-based paint, the year to know is 1978. And what the EPA says is anything built prior to 1978 requires the lead-based paint disclosures and addenda. And guys, always remember this applies to for sale and for lease because lead poisoning affects children, those developing bodies. Tenants come with kids as well, right? So we're not, and I'm not telling you this home was built this year and it's got lead. No, what I'm saying is because this home was built prior to 1978, it may have lead in it. So let's help educate, let's help make you aware of the dangers. Yeah, try two devices if you can. Log on to your phone as well, one where you can see and one where I can see you. Yes, ma'am. Talia, good morning.
Good morning. I was wondering, is this also for like commercial and stuff like that, or is it only residential?
It's only going to, that's a great question. Thank you. And it's only going to apply to residential. So yes, commercial buildings were built prior to 1978, probably have lead in them, but we care specifically about the dwelling where the people live because that's where we spend most of our time. Great question. Residential only. So the rest of Unit 20 is just kind of going over just a couple, things. And when it comes to environmental issues, we said the EPA's website is a great place to start. And if you ever start exploring around on the EPA's website, you probably don't have to go far to learn about CERCLA. And CERCLA is just a super fund that can help funding when there are, remember we talked about underground storage tanks. And when the contents of the tanks leak, oil, gas, whatever's in the tank leaks, and it can spread. A good quick rain comes in and it creates swift moving water and it can carry that oil, that gas over several property lines. When that happens, they're going to source it back to where it started. And if it started in an underground storage tank in your backyard, you're going to be responsible for it. But homeowners, rest assured, there's funding available. There are programs available. And CERCLA just kind of helps with these issues, environmental issues. So this is just an FYI. You can always reference, again, EPA's website, their book, and your book. There's a couple Clean Air, Clean Water Acts that EPA provides. Of course, the Clean Air Act enforces good air quality. So anybody with refrigerants, for example, anything that can leak and poison the air, if you will, and you can see this isn't a syllabus. I'm going off book for just a second. EPA also has a Clean Water Act, same thing. just trying to regulate pollutions and keeping our air and our water clean. The water, like we said the other day, all water eventually goes back to and gets filtered and becomes the water that we drink. So it's got to be purified. It goes through a process, of course, but if it comes in contaminated, then it's going to have to go through a more rigorous process. So by the time it comes out of our faucets, it's better. When it comes to any of these environmental issues, understand the owner carries the most liability. That underground storage tank, even if it was buried by a previous owner, and like we said, you guys, I mean, there's like millions of underground storage, buried underground, abandoned tanks across the whole country. You and I are not responsible for finding it. Owner's going to carry the most liability, but understand you and I are not totally off the hook. When it comes to these environmental issues, the key is disclose. Once you learn about an environmental issue, then we need to disclose. And as promised, what did I say? I only needed 5 more minutes for Unit 20. Man, we were so close. So that gets us through. 20. Guys, remember, lots of green stars. We're not spending all of our study time in Unit 20. We're just having a very basic understanding. Lead-based paint is the only yellow star. Do a little deeper dive into that. I would read that section. But otherwise, we're not spending all of our study time in Unit 20. Everybody hear me? Thumbs ups, acknowledgements, something. So those key terms to be familiar with are on page 521. Your key point review is 536. And then your student quiz is 539. Questions from Unit 20. All right, that's that. Y'all want a Kahoot? Let's grab your phones. This Kahoot is units 4 through 6. So this will kind of be a nice little recap, nothing on 20, but 4, 5, and 6. A couple questions from both. And I'm getting you a QR code. There's your QR code. There you go. If you're doing the website of the app, you need a game pin. So there's your game pin for this game. Otherwise, you can just scan the QR code and it'll plop you right in. And they ask you for your name. I'm fine if you want to use a nickname or initials. And they ask you who you are in a private chat because I'm curious. But if you want to use a nickname or initials, I'm okay with that for Kahoot. And remember, I never make you Kahoot. So if you don't want to play, that's fine. No requirement. If you don't want to play on your phone, I just ask that you play in your mind. If you get a question wrong, jot it down. That'd be a good opportunity to go look up that material, that information. Give another minute or so to get in, those of you that want to play. Can you guys hear the music? You guys hear that on your end a little bit? Yeah. I hate Kahoot music. Not my jam, I guess, you know? Everybody in that wants to play? Again, this is units 4 through 6. Okay. Let's Kahoot. Question number 1. The system of legal description that defines a parcel of land by the parameter. 10 seconds. The legal description that defines it by the parameter is the meets and bounds. The meets and bounds is the one primarily used in North Carolina. The meets and bounds has a POB, point of beginning. And that POB tells us where to start and where to end. And what the meets and bounds does is it takes a tour of the property. It walks the parameter of the properties and it goes from monument to monument to monument until we get back to the point of beginning. And when we're done, what we have is the parameters. It doesn't identify the improvements, but what it does say is anything within these parameters is part of the property and it will convey. Rectangular government survey system is what they use out west. That's our grid system with townships and sections. Questions on this one? All right, let's see how we did out the gate. I got Shay on top, followed by Jen, Cece, Allie, and Talia. Question number 2. In a North Carolina real estate transaction, excise taxes are the responsibility of ten seconds. Who pays excise taxes? The seller. It's a seller charge. They tax you when you buy it. They tax you while you own it. And they got one more opportunity to tax you when you sell it. And that is called your excise taxes. It's a debit to the seller. By the way, I love you guys. Y'all like, I don't know what this is, but I know the real estate agent ain't going to pay it. Nobody said that. I'll let the attorney pay it before I think I'm going to pay it. Questions on excise tax. This is the one, the purchase price is 500. So you take the purchase price, divide by 500, and then if you have change, you round up to the nearest whole dollar. So let's check out our leaderboard. Jen's up on top, Cece and Shay. Mel is on the board, Allison's on the board. Cindy's our highest climber, up three places. Question number 3. Which of the following deeds contains no express or implied warranties? A no warranty deed. Quit claim deed. Good job. Quit claim deed. No express or implied warranties. Remember, express means the terms have been clearly stated. Implied is just based on the action. So in North Carolina, when we use a quit claim deed, it is to maybe correct a typo. It is to create or terminate an easement. We might use a quit claim deed if somebody buys and then gets married and wants to create a tenancy by the entirety. We may use a quit claim deed if that couple later gets divorced and we want to convey from us to me. So quit claim deed basically says, what I got, you get. No warranties. So if I got nothing, what you getting? Nothing. No warranties. General warranty deed has the most. General warranty deed has the most warranties. This is the one that's the best for the buyer because it puts the liability on the seller. Special warranty deed has a few. Questions on this one? What's that leaderboard say? Shay's back on up on top. Cece, Mel's on the board. Allison's up. Jen's up. Bhavya is our highest climber. She's up 3 places this round. Question number 4. Which of the following is an essential element of a valid North Carolina deed? Essential element. Ten seconds. We need to turn to our books on page 87 and 88. This is why I like this Kahoot question. Page 87 gives us our essential elements of a valid deed. Who gets to determine the validity of a deed? The validity of any document. Who's the one that gets to determine that? Anybody? Get it coming in the chat. It's the judge. It's the judge's responsibility to determine if a document is valid. And when you hand the judge a document and say, is this valid? They are looking for essential elements. So when we hand them a deed and say, look, is this a good deed? Will this thing stand up in a court of law? The judge is looking for the essential elements listed on page 87. When we think of essential elements, think of your required cake ingredients. If you don't have essential elements, then you don't have a valid deed. Now, we know we like to put stuff on our cake to make it better, right? You like icing and ice cream and fruit and all that other good stuff. So how do you make a deed better? Flip over to page 88. And there are your elements that are not required. The judge isn't looking for it to be recorded. The reason yes, deeds are recorded. The reason we record is not because of the validity of the deed. The reason we record is because the North Carolina Connor Act tells us that we need to do that. Does everybody see that? So you got your essential elements on 87 or your required cake ingredients. And then on page 88, you have the things that go on the cake. You still have cake if you don't put icing on it. The icing just makes it better. Does everybody, what questions do I have on this? Dog ear, 87 and 88. This is a common problem topic. Yes, ma'am, Kiana.
Where does it say the judge? Where does it say the judge?
It doesn't tell us that in the book specifically, but we know when we talk about a valid document, it's got to be that person of authority. It's got to be that court.
Okay.
I could look at it all day long and I could say, yeah, this looks good to me, but that means nothing to you.
Okay.
Everybody good? Signature of the grantee, back on page 87, it's not the grantee that signs it, it's the grantor. The grantor signs it, the grantee accepts it. I do recommend taking a piece of paper in your notebook, draw a line down the middle, and on one side, put the essential elements, and on the other side, put the things that are not required. So that way you can see them side by side. Okay. So let's see what happened to our leaderboard. Shay's staying on top, and actually she's on fire this round. So she's the one to beat you guys, followed by Cece and Mel, Allison and Jen. Question number 5, restrictive covenants. Uh, 5 seconds. Restrictive covenants are pertinent. What's that mean? They apply to and bind all successive owners in the property. The first person that buys in this subdivision has to follow the covenants. The second person, the 500th person. Everybody that buys in this subdivision has to follow the covenants. The developer is long gone. Y'all think about some of these subdivisions, they're like 20, 30, 40 years old. The developer is long gone. They've built 5 more subdivisions since then, but the covenants remain. The covenants are left behind. Questions on this one? Cece and Shay, this could be interesting. Mel, Allison, and Jen, that didn't shuffle much. Cece and Shay shift around. Number 6, the primary intent of zoning. The primary intent. Primary intent of zoning. Zoning controls how we use the land. It's a public land use control. Public land use control. Questions on this one? Protect residential neighborhood from commercial encroachments. That's one thing that it may do, but it's not its primary intent. So they may have that buffer zone, which is what we're saying there with the green one, but it's not its primary intent. So sometimes you guys, you may have 2 really good answers. And now we just need to decide, as we do in this one. We have 2 really good answers. So now just to be a matter of go back to the question, review the question. Okay, I have 2 good answers. What specifically is this question asking me for? Its main purpose, its primary intent. If you do that, then at least you've narrowed it 50-50, right? Questions on this one? So Shay's up, Allison's up, Cece's on the board, Mel and Jen. Haley's our highest climber, up 3 places this round. And I think the last one, yep. Which of the following best describes a variance? 10 seconds. A variance is permission to break the rules. How many property owners can be granted a variance? You can all show me how many property owners with a variance. Just one and only one. So one homeowner, one, goes to the zoning board and says, because of your zoning ordinances, I'm suffering a unique hardship and I need permission to break the rules. I need permission to use my property in a way that's different than your current zoning. And if the zoning board approves it, they have been granted a variance. It's permission to break the rules. Questions on this one? Final leaderboard. I got our third place winner is Cece. I got our second place winner is Allison. And our first place winner is Shay. Fourth and fifth runners up, they give me that too. Mel and Jen. It's a win, right? Good job though. Is Kahoot helpful? Thumbs up. Is it helpful? Kind of go back and hit these things. I know it's fun. I need it to be helpful as well. If you missed a question, if you weren't sure of something, this is a good opportunity for us to come back and review. This is a good opportunity for you to know what you may need to come back and check out. Questions or comments? All right. I want to take just a few minutes and just go over a few things with you guys. I've been talking a lot lately about the weight of the material. We've all gotten comfortable now with seeing our green star, yellow star, and red star. As we get into Unit 7, we're going to start seeing lots and lots of red stars. Remember, we're starting to get into heavily tested material. And I just want to take a few minutes. It's one thing for me to see it, for me to say it, but it's another thing for you guys to see it. So I want to take just a few minutes and show you where I get my information. Show you why I can stand here and say this is heavily tested material. So we have a couple sources. This comes from a few places. And first off, we're in the online learning system, and I'm in the welcome section. And we briefly introduced you guys to the syllabus the other day. You may want to look it over. Remember, the North Carolina Real Estate Commission provides us the syllabus, and they say anything that you may see on your state exam comes from the syllabus. So first off, I always want you guys to rest assured that this class was written with the syllabus in my hand. So if we're talking about it, it's a good candidate for your state exam. You don't have to ask me, can I be tested on this? If we're talking about it, it came from the syllabus, it's on the syllabus, it's a candidate for your state exam. If we look at the syllabus, and I'm going to scroll ahead, the introduction, you guys can peruse through this if you'd like. But if we scroll ahead a bit, we start seeing the syllabus tells us that they categorize the material. So they say level 1 material means to recall. Level 2 material is an application. You should be able to use it in a situation. And then level 3 material, you should be able to justify, you should be able to teach this stuff, basically, that well in-depth information. What the syllabus calls level 1, level 2, and level 3, I call green star, yellow star, and red star. So where I got the different star colors for our PowerPoints, I pull straight from the different levels. I just think colored stars are much prettier than 1, 2, 3. So, and if you were to peruse through the syllabus, you're going to see that it tells us this is level 1 material. This is level 2 material, level 1 again, etc. So whatever they call level 1, I call Green Star. What they call level 2, I call yellow. And what they call level 3, I call red. So that's one source, that's one place that we can determine the weight, determine if this is the level, the in-depth that we need to know about the material. I do encourage you, this is on page, 5 of the syllabus. You may want to come back and look at this and get a better understanding of the level that you need. And that helps you with your study time. Level 1, if you can define the word, move on. You don't need to do a deep dive on level 1 stuff. You need to do the deep dive on level 3 stuff. Does that make sense? Everybody good with that piece? So the syllabus gives us that. The second source I have for us, still in the online learning system, still in the welcome section. And we have a booklet called Real Estate Licensing in North Carolina. Now, you guys got this as a PDF from Lane when you signed up for this class. I believe she asked you to go ahead and look at it. We're going to spend some time in this booklet after we get through Unit 10. We're still a couple weeks away, but we're going to spend some time. There's testable material in this booklet, so if you haven't looked at it yet, I encourage you to do so. This booklet also answers the question, how do I apply for my state exam? How do I apply for my real estate license? So we're going to go through that process when we get about halfway through, which is Unit 10, and we're going to spend some time talking about that process. For now, though, I want to skip ahead and share with you on page 19. They give us examination content outline again for your state exam. And then they give us the categories and they tell me how many questions you can expect to see in each category. So anything that falls under real property, you can expect to see 9 questions. Valuation, that's our Unit 17. Contracts and agency, this is where we're heading. You have it broken down on the national section for you, and then you have it broken down in the state section as well. The categories listed here correspond to the categories in the syllabus. So if you want to know what is covered under real property, for example, you go back to the syllabus. We come down here to our yep, so they say. Somewhere in here it should say real property, property characteristics, legal description, yeah. Here's our taxes and insurance. It tells us specifically what's covered. Here's agency and contracts. It tells us specifically what is covered under each category. And by the way, you got a link to the syllabus right here as well, so you can link it back and forth. I think this is helpful now, again, so we can see that I'm not just making this stuff up. It actually comes from somewhere, specifically the Real Estate Commission. But more importantly, when you guys are ready to go to the state exam, I direct you to this because your state exam is pretty much the whole syllabus. But if you feel like, well, gee, do I really need to know agency? You're going to get 16 questions. Some of that in the national, you're going to get 16 questions on agency in the state specific section. So we're looking at, let's just say that's half. So let's just say 24 questions on agency. Remember what we've been saying, math. How many questions, math questions can you expect to see? Only 7. You're going to see 24 in agency. You're only going to see 7 math questions. Agency alone can fail you almost. It'd be close. Math alone can't. Does that make sense? So use this, especially as you're preparing for the state exam. Fast forward, you're preparing for that state exam. This is how you can know the weight. This is how you can know where to put your study efforts. So I got a couple questions. Do you think it's best that we guide our focus on the yellow and red material along with the key terms instead of reading everything in the chapter? The PowerPoints help direct you where to focus in the book. If you're studying the PowerPoints alone, you're not doing enough. The PowerPoints direct you, and the red star stuff, you need to read that whole section. The Green Star stuff, glance it over. Don't skip the Green Star stuff because, guys, the Green Star stuff is a basic understanding of what the word means. If you don't know what the word means, you can't address a yellow star or a red star question. So you can use the Green Star. You can build up. Welcome back. It's a lot, you guys. I never stand here and pretend that it's not. Remember, I sat where you did at one point. Always remember that. I was where you were at one point, and I know it's a lot. I'm aware of that. Hopefully we have been together 2 weeks now. Hopefully we have formed or are forming our study habits. We're getting ready for this heavily tested material. We're getting ready for, guys, things move fast in this class, I think, as we've realized. And also remember, I don't have a rear view mirror in class. You guys need to go back 1 through 6 and 20. We're done. We're moving on. You need to keep going back and reviewing it because you're going to be tested on things that we've covered. We're going to build on what we've learned. If you want to come back with me, that's when you reach out to me outside of class. But a class as a whole, we got to keep pointing forward if we want to cover all the material. Do you guys want to cover all the material? Then we've got to keep pointing forward. And this is, remember, I'm a resource. So reach out to me outside of class. Let me help. What do we think? Overall, how are we feeling so far? How are we doing? Thumbs ups. Nice. Are we finding time to study? Remember on the first day I gave you a part-time job, didn't I? Are we finding time for that part-time job? Sitting in class, it's not enough. Studying the PowerPoints is not enough. Your exams are application exams, which means you're going to be put in a scenario. I took pre-licensing in 2008. Actually ran into my pre-licensing instructor, literally ran into him yesterday at Costco. I was like, well, how about that? Small world. So again, just to take a minute and kind of show you where we get this source, where we get this information. Breaking it up into chunks, breaking it up into sections. This is why we do 1 to 2 hour study sessions at a time. Please don't think you're going to sit there for 8 hours on Saturday and do nothing but study. Our brains don't work that way. You got to give yourself a break. Y'all know the old saying, how do you eat an elephant? The answer is 1 bite at a time. So how do you get this material? 1 bite at a time. Is there a study review for the class final? I am putting the finishing touches on it right now. So give me a few more days and I'll have it available and I'll show you guys where it's ready. But I do have an end of course exam review that just focuses on our end of class. Like I said, I've updated it, refreshed it. I don't have a specific date for you. I'm sorry, but I will get it to you guys as soon as I can. Give me another week, maybe. And I will tell you when it's available. And that will allow you to focus on what you need to know for my exam. Speaking of my exam, as a quick reminder, our tentative schedule tells us, hopefully these dates are in your calendar as well. The 21st is our end of class exam. The retake, if you qualify, is November 23rd. Please make sure you have these dates in your calendar.
Is there a testing location that we're going to take the exams at, or we're going to do it online?
My exams are online. When you go take your state exam, you'll have a testing center.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. And we'll talk about, again, the whole process of how do I get my license? What do I do? Where do I go? All that's coming in that relink book that we'll talk about at the end of unit 10. So a few more weeks and we'll kind of go through that process. But yeah, both of our exams are online. We ready to do agency? This is why we're here, guys. Are we ready to learn what it means to be an agent? Yes, here we go. Unit 7. Unit 7 gets us into agency. In Unit 7, we are going to we are going to understand the different types of agency, the different methods in which we can work with buyers and sellers. We're also going to create it, and we're going to learn how we properly create agency. Unit 7 is the law and practice of agency. Unit 8 is the more applicable. Unit 8 is when we discuss your commission. I know you guys come in this wanting to know, when do I get paid? How do I get paid? It's all about me getting paid. I need you to simmer down. I cannot pay you until you understand and create agency. Everybody with me? So we will talk about your commission, when, how, why, all that good stuff in 8, but please don't ask me about it yet because we haven't created agency yet. So 7 and 8 are our agency units. We're going to be in 7 for like the next 2 or 3 classes. How many of you have looked ahead at unit 7? Please be honest with me. How many of you have looked ahead? I see 4 hands. Guys, please look ahead. Thank you. A few more. Thank you. Please look ahead, you guys. This stuff gets deep. Before we pick up the book, well, let's look at our roadmap first. We're going to explain in this unit, this is so vague, we're going to explain agency and the different types of agency relationships. We're going to talk about a customer. We're going to talk about a client. We're going to differentiate our roles for both. There are certain duties I owe my customer. There are certain duties that I owe my client. We're going to do that deep dive into material facts. We briefly introduced you to the idea of material facts, but we're going to do a deep dive into them in unit 7. And then we're also going to talk about our working with real estate agent disclosure. Remember what it means to disclose something? I can see your mouths move. That's right. If you're disclosing, you mean you're telling. So when we're doing a working with real estate agent disclosure, I have a duty to tell the consumer what my agency status is. So we're going to talk about that disclosure. That's at the very end. Before we get into the book, there are a couple concepts that I would like to go ahead and introduce you to so we can start wrapping our brain around some of these things. Don't feel the need to write this down. Remember, I never encourage you guys to write every word of the PowerPoint. Rest assured, everything I'm getting ready to introduce you to right now, we will see later in the unit. But again, I'm pulling them out now because I think if we can hear it now, it might make what follows a little easier to grasp, a little easier to understand. So a couple things to introduce us to understand. North Carolina is a caveat emptor state. Caveat emptor is Latin for let the buyer beware. What caveat emptor means is that it is the buyer's responsibility to learn about the property. The seller doesn't have to disclose. It is the buyer's responsibility to learn about the property. And guess what? When the buyer hires an agent, we take on that responsibility with them. The buyer's agent's responsibility is to help the buyer learn. As we learn when we get into our contracts in 9 and 10, the buyer may not be on the hook to buy once they learn about the property. They may have an out. More on that with our contracts. But right now we're understanding North Carolina, other states may vary. North Carolina is caveat emptor. which puts the responsibility to learn about the property on the buyer. The seller doesn't have to disclose much. Also in North Carolina, homes are sold as is, which means the seller doesn't have to repair. The seller doesn't have to disclose. The seller doesn't have to repair. Who do we favor in North Carolina? We favor the seller. Caveat emptor and as is. The onus is on the property, is on the buyer. Can the seller agree to do repairs? Can they agree to fix something? Sure. Do they have to? No. We have a very important sentence in our sales contract that says this property is being sold in its current condition. Nice. Another big thing for us to understand, the buyer or seller, the consumer, hires the firm. We're going to start talking about agency relationships. We get into our agency agreements in Unit 8. Understand the agency relationship is between the client and the firm, not the individual agent. Guys, here's the deal. I run around all day, every day, talking about my buyer and my seller. Is it my buyer? No, it is my firm's buyer. Is it my seller? No, it is my firm's seller. My firm allows me to work with their buyer and seller. By the way, whose commission is it? Is it my commission? It is the firm's commission because that's who has the relationship. So the consumer, and once the consumer hires, they become the client. Again, we're going to do that distinction between client and firm or customer. As a real estate agent, we've said this, as a real estate agent, all I am is a fact finder. What's my opinion matter? Not much. I'm not the one selling this house. What do I gain by selling this house? Nothing. I'm not the one buying this house. Am I the one agreeing to take on a 30-year mortgage? I'm a fact finder. I help my buyers and sellers gather the facts so they can make an informed decision. I can advise, I can counsel, but ultimately it is their decision. I am just helping guide them through the transaction. By the way, let me say something else. Unit 7 and 8, when we talk about agency, it's heavy on residential sales. So I'm talking about buyers and sellers, residential sales. Commercial agency is very close. I got a whole unit dedicated for the property manager that's working with landlords and tenants. So we'll specifically pull those out. Anybody going into property management? Thinking about property management? Not yet. Maybe a few of you. Good, good. Maybe. I hear you. Julie, let me get my license first and then I'll figure it out, right? I got you. I got you. But just know that when we talk about 7 and 8, it's heavy residential sales. So we're referring to buyers and sellers. The other thing I want to introduce you guys to is some verbiage. We're going to start seeing this verbiage, and we're going to see this slide several times because this does tend to be a problem topic. Who we are depends on who we're working with. So if we're working with the buyer, we may be referred to as the buyer's agent or the buyer's firm. We may also be referred to as the selling agent or the selling firm. When we're working with the seller, we're referred to as the seller's agent, seller's firm. We may also be referred to as the listing agent and the listing firm. The ings are what we see on our official contracts, on our official documents. So we need to know our role. I refer to myself in talking to people as a buyer's agent or a seller's agent, but we need to understand the selling and the listing as well, because that's the verbiage, that's the terminology that our forms use. The ing is the verb, it's the action. So if I'm working with the buyer, I'm selling them the home. If I'm working with the seller, I'm listing it for them. So again, just introducing you to some verbiage. We'll see this a couple times. just so we make sure we're good. Another thing to introduce you guys to. We do not spend this class focused on license law and commission rule. We talk about it, we mention it, we reference it, but we don't spend this whole class talking about it. I don't ask you guys to read much with license law and commission rule, but there is one commission rule I think you should read, and it's Commission Rule 58A.0104, and it's on agency agreements and disclosures. This is the North Carolina Commission Rule on agency agreements and disclosures. Now, I'm not going to lie. It's rule. This isn't a fun read. It's rule. Have y'all ever sat down and tried to read law and rule? Boring as all get out, isn't it? This isn't a fun read. It's only like 2.5 pages, but I would suggest maybe breaking it down into chunks, dissecting it. I want you guys to read this. I'll show you in 1 second where you can find it. I want you guys to read this to help us better understand our agency agreements and disclosure. Once you've read it, go back and read it again. When you've read it a second time, what the heck, you're on a roll, go read it again. I need you guys to see this over and over and over to help us better understand agency agreements and disclosure. So let's go out right now and show you where you can find it. We are in the online learning system, and now we're under the Julie folder. And under the Julie folder is Commission Rule 58A.0104, Agency Agreements and Disclosure. You guys see this little box up here with the arrow coming out of it? That's your download. So if you want to download it to your device, if you want to print it out, again, it's only 3 pages. However you best see it, you have the option to download it and take it with you. But it is under the Julie folder. Start now and break it up into sections. Don't feel like you have to sit here and understand every single word the first time through. This is why we read it again. The second time you read it, it's going to make more sense than the first. The third time, make more sense than the second. It's in the Julie folder. Questions so far? Comments? Let's go ahead and take our break. And we come back, we will be on page 134, getting into Unit 7. are back. Welcome back. Cameras are coming back on. So I'm going to go ahead and take attendance. Maddie, Talia, I got you guys. You're in. Oh, everybody's in. Smile. All right, we're here. Welcome back. It's funny, some of the poses we catch, myself included, in screenshots. All right. Unit 7, here we go. So first off, understanding brokerage and agency. How we practice agency, where we get agency, comes from several different sources. They refer to the common law of agency, but I think it's important that we understand it's not just one specific source, not one specific law. It comes from multiple places. So common law of agency is kind of where it all started. And we can kind of think of common law and agency created back in the days of England, the earlier days of England, when we had a king. Weren't we all expected to treat the king a certain way, not dishonor the king? And so we kind of took that idea of the king, and it helped form our common law of agency today. We also practice agency through contract law. So previous court cases, for example, continuing court cases. I know the beginning of this class, we mentioned the National Association of Realtors settlement. That has changed how we practice if you're a realtor. If you're not a realtor, then you don't have to follow that. More on that. But various contract laws. There's an interesting, very interesting story in your books, the Adena lawsuit. You may want to read that. I think understanding where we came from better helps us understand where we are today. So once upon a time ago, you guys, we didn't have buyer's agency. Once upon a time ago, we all represented the seller. The buyers were unrepresented, always. It's how agency started. To best understand that, think about going car shopping. If you want to go car shopping, you go up to the lot, right? You're walking around the lot, and the salesman kind of pops up out of nowhere. Hey, folks, how you doing today? And you look around the lot. Who does that car salesman represent? Do they represent your best interest? No, the car salesman is there representing the seller of the car. They're representing their best interest. So you walk with this car salesman around the lot, and you don't see a car that you like. So what do? You go to the next lot, and you look on that lot. You find something you like or you don't, you go to the next, and you keep going from lot to lot to lot until you find the car you like, right? Sound familiar? Before buyer's agency, that's how real estate was. So you went to a firm and you said, I want to buy a house. What do you have for sale? And they would show you their listings. And if you liked it, you would buy it. If you didn't, then you would go to the next firm and the next firm until you found the one that you liked. So there was this Adena lawsuit that popped up, and it was like in Minnesota. And there was a buyer that started this lawsuit because this buyer felt that based on the agent's actions, they had their best interest. The agent led them to believe that they represented the buyer. And then this person found out at the end of the transaction that they didn't have representation. So they started this lawsuit. This was a class action lawsuit. We know how these work, right? Several hundreds other people stood up and said, oh yeah, I felt the same way too. Me too, me too. So this thing turned into a really big deal. And you guys can see the firm that started this. I'm on the next page now, 136. But the firm that started this ended up settling for $19.9 million to all those buyers out there that felt that they were represented. Now, this was in Minnesota, but it still caused North Carolina to say, whoa, 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 maybe we need to rethink agency. Maybe we need to rethink how we do this. And so as a result of this lawsuit, North Carolina got buyer's agency. And y'all, I need you to understand, buyer's agency has only been in North Carolina since about the mid-90s. It's not that long ago. if you think about the big picture. Not all states today practice buyer agency. You could very well go to another state that only represents the sellers. But that contract law, that Adena lawsuit, helped shape how we treat agency today in North Carolina. And that's not the only contract law. That's not the only lawsuit. But all those helps form how we practice agency today. And understand we are a lawsuit away from changing how we do agency going forward. License law, we've mentioned. License law is North Carolina General Statute 93A. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then commission rule, chapter 58A. Again, also, you don't need to know the numbers. I just have them there for reference. What we know by looking at this screen, what we need to understand is when you refer to the common law of agency, we're not referring to one source. How we practice agency, what says how we handle agency, comes from several different places. Caveat emptor, we've said, is Latin for let the buyer beware. What we mean by that, the seller doesn't have to disclose what they know. They can choose whether or not they disclose. We're going to talk about seller disclosures, specifically their responsibility, when we get to Unit 8. So more on that to come. What we need to understand right now about caveat emptor, though, is that the responsibility, the burden of learning on the property, learning about the property, is on the buyer. So some of you are familiar with, you've heard of the buyer's due diligence period. That is the result of caveat emptor, and we will talk about the due diligence period when we get to our contract units. So bear with me. Caveat emptor, North Carolina, buyer beware, which all it means is the sellers don't have to disclose. The responsibility to learn about the property is solely on the buyer. And because today we have buyer's agency, when the buyer hires an agent, we take on that responsibility with them, helping them learn as much about the property as they possibly can. Fiduciary. Fiduciary is a relationship of trust. And when we enter into an agency relationship with our principal, also known as our client, we're talking about that next. When we enter into the relationship with our principal or our client, this fiduciary says that my principal should know that I have their best interest in this transaction, that I'm going to put their interest ahead of all others, including my own. This takes us back to that common law of agency thing when how we treated the king. The king wanted us to put their best interest ahead of everybody else's, including our own. So this idea of fiduciary, it's a relationship of trust. The principal should know when they hire me that they can trust I have their best interest in mind, that everything I'm doing is because that's what's best for them. The principal is the boss. I work for them. So on page 137, we start defining some words. Agency is that fiduciary relationship that's created between the principal and the firm. The principal hires the firm, not the individual agent. They hire the firm. The idea of agency is the idea that one party represents another. When I speak on behalf of my principal. I can't speak for them, but I speak on their behalf. And they trust that because we have that fiduciary relationship. Principal and client is the party that hires us. These are often used interchangeably, and this is a problem topic. When you see principal, think client. When you see client, think principal. They're one and the same. You become my client because you hire my firm. We have entered into an agency agreement. The agent is the entity. The agent is the firm. It's the one that's authorized to represent the best interest of the client. So when we talk about the agent, we're referring to the firm. When we talk about the broker, we're talking about the individual. The subagent is an agent of an agent. This prefix sub says, that prefix sub tells us under. So you're an agent under an agent. That's all I'm going to say about subagency right now. We are going to talk more about it later. It gets, there's two different forms of subagency. For right now, though, just easing into it, let's understand that a subagent is an agent of an agent under an agent. More on that to come. The customer then, or the third party, is the party in the transaction that didn't hire me. You either hire my firm or you don't. If you hire my firm, you're my client. If you don't, you're my customer. We're going to look at some examples in just a second. The customer is the third party. I do owe some duties to the customer. We'll talk about that. But bottom line, who I work for, who I represent, is the client. Everybody else in the transaction is my customer. You either hire me or you don't. And then a non-agency relationship is this facilitator or transactional broker, non-agency. With these types of transactions, all parties are the customers. Nobody is the client. As a transactional broker, you don't have the people's best interest in mind. You are here for the transaction. In North Carolina, the transactional brokership relationship is not allowed. In North Carolina, we just can't be a facilitator. In order for me to be involved in a transaction, somebody has to hire an agent. Somebody has to hire a firm. Maybe you've hired my firm, maybe you've hired another firm. But we cannot be involved in the transaction unless somebody is hired. And guys, this comes up, this is important in the real world, because this comes up, I think, a lot more than what we realize. First off, understand, people buy and sell houses all day, every day, without the assistance of a real estate firm or real estate agent. You don't have to hire an agent to buy or sell a house. So if you have a situation, let's say you have a buddy or somebody, or not even a buddy, some random person calls you and says, I'm interested in purchasing a for sale by owner. The for sale by owner is not represented. They chose to go it alone. Who's selling it? The owner. It's not being represented by a firm. And you tell that buyer, well, it's a for sale by owner. They're unrepresented. In order for me to help, you need to hire me. And that buyer says, no, I don't want to hire you. I can't. In order for me to be involved, in order for me to be in the transaction, somebody has to hire a firm. And we'll see a little bit more on that in just a second.
You
What
can
you need to know is that
negotiate
it's
that,
not
though?
allowed in North Carolina. Yes, ma'am.
You can negotiate that. Like you can hire them for $500 to do the paperwork, not a commission, or no?
Right, right. Our commission. So I could say, right, we could kind of a la carte it if your firm allows. If your firm allows. That's a great question. So you say, okay, guys, and why would they want me if they don't want to hire me? It's because I come with the paperwork. And if they don't hire me, they don't have paperwork, and now they have to call an attorney, and I'm a lot cheaper than an attorney. So we may be able to work something out, but they've hired me nonetheless, even if we a la carte it. Again, that comes down to your firm's policy. But the idea where everybody is the customer and nobody is represented, that's that facilitator broker, and it's not allowed in North Carolina. You may have picked up, I've been saying represented, who's not. So let's talk specifically about our clients and our customer. The client is represented by the firm. That's what it means to hire the firm. The firm now represents you. Everybody else in the transaction is the customer, and they are not represented by the firm. Maybe they're represented by another firm, but they're not represented by your firm. That's a question we need to start, or an idea, again, to start wrapping our brains around. It's not hiring the individual agent, it's hiring the firm. And once they hire the firm, they are represented by the firm and all of the brokers within the firm. When it comes to understanding represented versus unrepresented, I think it's best to think about this as going to court. If you hire an attorney, you're going to court represented. That attorney is standing next to you, and everything they do is in your best interest. If you don't hire an attorney, then you go to court unrepresented, and you're standing alone, you're standing by yourself. Everybody with me? So if we can think about that similarly, if you hire a firm, you're represented, somebody's standing next to you with your best interest. If you don't, maybe you're hired by another firm, but you're not represented by my firm. I don't care about other firms, you guys. When we talk about agency, I only care about my firm and who we represent. Yes, ma'am, Kiana.
Oh, I was just gonna say, so the client is basically the real estate agent that's under the company, basically?
Nope, the client is the one that hires the firm.
Oh, so like,
Client is the buyer or seller. Mhm.
oh, okay.
And they are the ones that we owe that fiduciary duty to. And we're going to break down, there's duties I owe my client, there's duties I owe my customer. So we're going to break those down. The firm works for the client. The firm works with the customer. The client is the one that hired us. But as we said, we still have duties that we owe to the customer. One of my mentors, when she's teaching agency, when she's teaching client versus customer, she uses the analogy of an airplane. So let's say this transaction is the airplane and you are the pilot. And you have a duty to figure out who goes where on your plane. You're going to put your client in first class. They get first class service. The customer is going to be back in coach. They're all on the same plane. And as the pilot, I have the responsibility of getting everybody from point A to point B at the same time. The difference is the level of service that's received in between. I've never flown first class, but I hear it's really nice. We get hot meal, warm towel. I hear champagne. I hear it's really nice up there. What do we get back in coach? Lukewarm Coca-Cola, right? Unsalted pretzels, right? You still get from point A to point B at the same time, but it's the difference is that level of service in between. So if we can think of our plane, we're going to put our clients in first class. Our customers go back in coach, but as we said, we still have duties and responsibilities for both. They hire us, the client hires us by the use of an agency agreement. Now we're going to mention agency agreements a few times in Unit 7. We do the deep dive on agency agreements in Unit 8. But the agency agreement is how they hire us. It's their ticket to first class. So this idea of client versus customer. If you represent or your firm represents the seller, that tells us that the seller is your client and the buyer is your customer. They're both on my plane, but I just need to know where to put them. If your firm's representing the buyer, That means that your buyer is the client, they get first class, and the seller is back in coach. Again, maybe the customer is represented by another firm, maybe they're not. What do I care about? That my firm isn't representing them. My firm, not your firm, my firm. As we get further and further into this next week, we're going to learn of a type of agency where we have both buyer and seller in first class. We're going to talk about dual agency. I'm far away from that. Please bear with me. But we could have a situation where the firm represents both buyer and seller in the same transaction, which means we got everybody crammed up in first class and nobody back in coach. And then if you represent neither, that is that transactional broker that we talked about. If both parties are the customer in North Carolina, we can't be involved. Somebody has to hire a firm. And more on that, you may want to make a note, more on that when we get into sub-agency. Somebody's got to hire any firm. Doesn't even have to be your firm. Somebody has to hire. Otherwise, it's a transactional broker. And in North Carolina, I cannot be involved. Questions so far? Client versus customer. So now what we're going to do is we're going to break down the duties. There are certain duties that I owe to my client. There are certain duties that I owe my customer. And we need to understand, we need to know what your role is. Again, it's the relationship that the individual has with the firm. So if you ever come across somebody and you're not sure what you owe them, you look up to the firm. If the firm has a relationship with them, they're the client. If not, they're the customer. So what duties do I owe both? Well, we've already said we're going to get everybody from point A to point B. We're going to get everybody through the contract to closing process. At the same time, the same, we're going to assist, we're going to fly that plane and get everybody through this. But there's different level of services that they receive in between. So let's talk about the client. And one way we can remember the level of service we owe our client is to think about Old Car. Old Car helps us break down the different duties that I owe my principal, also known as the client. The two are used interchangeably. We're going to go through each of these duties. I'm going to break down Old Car. Understand this now. Agency is not about you. Agency is about the client. The duties, the responsibilities that we owe the client. So I owe my principal Old Car. Let's break these down. The O in Old Car says that I am obedient to my client. I act in good faith at all times, and I follow my client's lawful instructions. I do whatever it is they tell me to do. They are the boss. But nobody can make me break the rules. And when we say rules, we mean like police rules. We mean license law. We mean commission rule. Nobody can make me break the rules. We're going to talk about some things that the principal and our license law and commission rule may be in conflict. So it's important that we understand that I follow my client's lawful instructions. Nobody can make me violate license law or commission rule. I am obedient. The L in old car is loyalty. I am loyal to this principal. They're the boss. I'm going to put their interest above all others, even my own. To be loyal means I need to be sensitive to conflict of interest. I can't try to talk my seller or buyer into or out of something because that might be what's best for me or my family member or my friend. They are number one. That's that fiduciary. They should trust that they are number one, that when they hire me. We are going to talk about some other conflicts of interest as we go. We're going to address them as conflicts of interest so we know how to keep us loyal. The D in old is disclosure. Now we're going to got a few slides here to talk about disclosure. What do we say it means to disclose? To tell. Guys, when it comes to my client, I don't have secrets. So when I learn of something, anything about this transaction, I have to tell them. I don't have secrets. I have to keep my principal informed at all times. And one of our biggest disclosure is this disclosure of material facts. And we're going to talk deep dive on material facts is coming. Super simple philosophy. When in doubt, disclose. If you find yourself saying, gee, should I tell them this? Yes. And remember what we document? Everything. So when I say tell them, I mean in writing. This will not stand up in a court of law. Everybody with me? Document everything. Again, if you find yourself going, gee, should I document this? Yes. Just do it. I'd rather y'all have too much than not enough. So let's break down this disclosure specifically when we're working with sellers and specifically when we're working with buyers. What does disclosure mean to the seller? There is a commission rule that says I have a duty to disclose all offers to my seller. We have to present all offers. I cannot make a decision for them. I can only speak on their behalf. We disclose all offers. Well, gee, Julie, what about the low ball offer that's just going to make my seller mad? Do I have to disclose it? Do I have to share it with them? Yes, I can't reject it for them. And you may come across a seller that says, let's say we have their home, for example, listed for $150. I'm going to make numbers up. We have it listed for $150. And the seller says, due to my financial circumstances, I cannot accept anything under $125. Perfect. Thank you for sharing that with me, seller. Because we're in a relationship, you can trust that that stays between me and you. I know how low my seller will be willing to go, but nobody else in the world does. Does that make sense? So they told me 170 or 125 is as low as they can go. An offer comes in for 120. Do I have to present it to them? But they told me they weren't going to accept it. Do I still have to present it to them? Shake your head, yes, because we disclose all offers. And guys, it's so simple. You call the seller, be like, hey, we got an offer 120. What do you think? Seller says, Julie, I'm sorry, I told you I couldn't do that. Awesome, have a nice day. Who rejected that offer? They did. They did. Everybody with me? Guys, we don't know. We think we know, but we only know what they share with me. What if? What if something happened to their financial situation last night and they decided they had to sell this home no matter what, and they just didn't have a chance to call you yet, and they found out that you rejected that offer on their behalf? Do you have a happy principal? Not even a little bit. We don't make these decisions. We disclose all offers. Also disclose to the seller if we find out that the buyer is willing to come up to a higher price. I don't care how you find out, but maybe you find out the buyer offered 120, but they'd be willing to go up to 126. Do I have to share that with my seller? Yeah, because they need all of the facts, all of the information when they're making this decision. Another thing to disclose to the seller, if we find out that the buyer plans to buy it and then turn around and sell it for a profit. Maybe they know something going on with zoning changes, for example. And if the zoning amendment passes, it'll increase the values in that area. The seller has to be the one to make the decisions. And the seller may say, I got to sell it right now anyway. I can't wait. The seller may say, ooh, I'm not going to sell it now. I'm going to wait and see if that zoning increases the value. Again, whose decision was that to sell it now or to wait? It was the seller's, not mine. When we're working with the buyers, we have a duty to disclose any known deficiencies about the property. Maybe the roof leaks, maybe the structural has issues, maybe the plumbing shot, I don't know. Whatever deficiencies we find out, again, how do we find out? Maybe the other agent calls you. Maybe you learn through, another agent that showed the property, or maybe they had it under contract. Maybe your buyer puts it under contract and we're looking at our inspection report together. No matter how you find out about any issues with the property, we've got to disclose that to the buyers. They need that information when making a decision. And then any factors that could affect their decision. So some examples of this. Maybe you find out why the seller is selling. Maybe we learn their motivation. I have to disclose that to my buyer. Days on market. Remember, we're starting to talk to you guys about being the experts of your market. And part of being the expert of your market is to know about how long a property stays on the market before it goes under contract. You know that average days on market because you are the expert of your market. Back in 2020, the average days on market was like 4. Today, we're like up to 50. We're doing a little bit better. But let's say you're taking this listing, you have this buyer, and the average days on market is 50, and you see this property's been on the market for 80. Is that something the buyer may want to know? They may have an advantage because maybe the seller is ready to sell. Maybe they're not. I don't know. But I'm sharing this information. I'm the expert of my market. I know my average days on market. I'm in MLS looking at this stuff, studying this stuff on the regular. Questions? Introducing you to disclosure, but any questions so far? Anything on old? Obedience, loyalty, and disclosure.
Actually, I got a question.
Yes.
Okay, so basically the seller is us, right? And then the buyer is the person buying the house, right?
The seller is the person selling the house. They are the homeowner.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking about the other way. Okay.
The seller is the homeowner. The buyer is the one that wishes to be the homeowner.
Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, okay, okay, okay.
So now let's talk about CAR. The C in CAR is confidentiality. Once my client tells me something, they trust then I'm going to keep that to myself. How am I doing them good if I'm running around telling everybody how low they're willing, what the lowest offer they're willing to accept? Am I best representing them? I know we're listed for 150, but I'll tell you what, my guys would be willing to accept 125. How is that in the best interest of my seller? They trust when they hire me, buyer and seller. That works both ways. Maybe my buyer offered 125 and they tell me they're willing to go up to 135. Am I going to call the seller and tell them that? And they trust that I'm not, because we owe them confidentiality. I cannot disclose, there's certain information about this transaction, their financial conditions, their motivation for buying or selling, acceptable terms, what they would be willing to accept. I cannot disclose information about the transaction without my client's written permission. I had a seller several years ago, and they were getting a little, they were ready to sell, and we'd had some offers come in, but nothing great. And my seller called me one day and she said, go into our listing, go into the remarks, and please put that we are, how'd she put it, super highly motivated. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I will put in motivated seller. What is motivated seller? Tell the buyer. Bring me something. Just bring me something and we'll work with it, right? Now, let's be honest, you guys. Aren't all sellers motivated? I mean, something made them put the for sale sign in the front yard. So all sellers are motivated. But when you advertise that they're motivated, you're indicating that they would be willing to accept less than. Everybody with me? And I said, I will not put super highly motivated seller, but I will put motivated seller in once you send me an email giving me permission to do that. Because I had to get their permission to disclose, to tell that they might be willing to accept something lower than what we have it listed for. Does that make sense? So I'm only disclosing their confidential information with their written permission. When it comes to confidentiality, this is an old car thing only, a client thing only. I tell my client everything that I know about the customer. But guess what? I tell my customer nothing about my client without their written permission. That's that fiduciary. That's that level of agency, that level of trust. My client should know that I'm not running around town blabbing their information unless I have their written permission to do so. The A&O car is accounting. I'm going to help them account for their funds. At some point during the transaction, I'll probably have somebody else's money in my hand. We will talk about what that money is. But when that money is in my possession, who's responsible for it, do you think? When it's in my possession, me. That's that accounting. They should trust that when I'm handling their money, I'm accountable for it. Also, under accounting, there's a commission rule that says we have to maintain all records for a minimum of 3 years. Write that down. We keep all records for a minimum of 3 years. Also with accounting is helping them make sure that their final numbers are right. That the buyer, what the buyer brings to closing, that number is accurate. What your seller's gonna get from closing, that number is accurate. We're gonna learn how to verify those numbers in Unit 21. We talk about our buyers' debits and credits, sellers' debits and credits, and bottom line, what are their final figures on closing day? We're going to help them ensure that those numbers are accurate. And then the R in CAR is our reasonable skill, care, and diligence. Again, we're going to spend some time on this. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence basically says, just because I can doesn't mean that I should. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence says, just because I can does not mean that I should. Can you speed? You're in your lane. Can you go past the speed limit? How fast do y'all drive when you get on 40? Do you go the speed limit? Yeah, I don't either. I got a new car last year, and she has something in it called a turbo. And I don't really know what that means, except that it's really easy to go really fast. A lot of fun. Does that make it okay? But officer, the car can exceed the speed limit. Does that make it okay? And that's what reasonable skill, care, and diligence says. Agency is staying in your lane. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence is teaching us the speed limit. Y'all, with agency, it's really hard. It's really easy, excuse me. It's really easy to speed. But agency teaches us that speed limit, what we can do within our lane. We've talked about your soon-to-be North Carolina real estate license. It tells you you can brokerage any transaction as long as the property is located in the state of North Carolina. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence says maybe we only focus on a market, an area, a section. Can you practice the entire state? Yes. Should you? Reasonable skill, care, and diligence says you got to take some thought on that. So reasonable skill, care, and diligence that we owe to the seller. At some point during your listing appointment, the seller's going to look at you and ask you, how much should I list my house for? You think you're just going to blurt a number out? No research, no investigating, no, pulling other comps, that kind of thing? No. When I answer that question, it's going to be an educated response with facts, with data. We're going to talk about pulling comps, how I can answer that question. That all comes in Unit 17. Some more on that. What we need to know now is reasonable skill, care, and diligence says before I answer that question, I have reasonable skill, care, and diligence says I owe it to them to have a good answer supported by data. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence owed to the seller, anything that the buyer would aid the seller in making a decision. So again, if we learn anything about the buyer whatsoever, understand once you're hired, talking to me is just as good as or should be just as good as talking to the seller. So if I learn something about my buyer, it should be that the seller heard it directly. That's that fiduciary. That's that principle. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence when I'm advertising the property for sale. Yes, we're going to put it online. We're going to put it on the internet so the whole world can see it. You know what every single real estate agent in the world does? They put it online for everybody to see. What else are you going to do? There's more to it than online. How else are you going to advertise their property? Are you going to do an open house? Are you going to have a realtor or a broker open? And then also helping the seller translate the terms of the offer. Y'all, when we get to Unit 10, our sales contract is 17 pages. It's like a mini book, right? The seller doesn't understand the terms. They don't know the terms. That's not their job. Their job is to sell the house. My job is to help them understand what those terms mean. So when we get an offer in, I'm telling you right now, the seller only cares about how much and when. But when we look at our contract, we're going to see that there's a lot more involved than price and closing date. And we're going to help them translate those terms. We're going to help them understand the terms of those offers. And then we have reasonable skill, care, and diligence that we owe to the buyer. Similarly, when your buyer finds the one, you've been out showing them property. Maybe you showed them one, maybe you showed them 30. Unfortunately, there's no magic number. We keep at it until they find the one. And they finally find it. They walk in the front door and they say, this is it. This is the one I've been looking for. And the very next question out of their mouth is going to be, how much should I offer? Again, y'all just going to blurt a number out? You're going to look at the buyer and say, well, this is the listing price, and I'm sure the seller listed it right. So just offer them the listing price without doing any research, looking at any data. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence says no. My answer is going to be educated. And again, that data is coming in Unit 17. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence. I'm going to help my buyer locate and view suitable properties, things that check off their boxes. I only want to spend our time together showing you properties that you can afford. I know we all like to go out and look at mansions and pretty houses and everything, but if your buyer's only qualified for 250, don't go try to show them something for 500. You've just wasted both of your time. So let's just see the properties. Let's spend our time together wisely and just look at the properties that you qualify for. We can always expect, you know, when you first meet buyers and you ask them, what do you want? They're going to do 3-bed, 2 baths with a, you know, garage and right. They have their standard. And we can expect that to change. But if they say, y'all know how many buyers out there aren't serious? They're just looky-loos. They just want to go around looking at pretty houses. They're out there. Save both of y'all's time. We're going to talk about how we can get our buyers pre-qualified before we ever show them a property. That's coming in our lenders units. Making sure we're spending both of our time together wisely. Financing. Making sure they can afford to buy the homes that you're looking, that they want to see. Making sure that they talk to a lender. Encourage your buyers to shop around. Talk to one lender, great. Maybe you talk to 2 or 3 so you have something to compare it to. Get more on that. And then presenting offers on behalf of your buyer. Remember that 17-page sales contract? I'm going to complete that with the help of my buyer. How much do you want to offer based on the data? When do you want to close? What are the terms? We're going to help them complete their offer. And then I'm going to present their offer on their behalf. And I'm going to present it like a fiduciary. I'm going to present it like an agent. I can't tell you guys. I'll leave you with this before we go to break. Hang on. I can't tell you guys as a listing agent how many times I've gotten a call from a buyer's agent that says, I'm getting ready to send you an offer. And it's not great, but it's all that my buyer is willing to do. So I'm pretty sure y'all will reject it. Just let me know. Is that how you old car? Is that how you best represent your buyer? Absolutely not. When y'all are presenting a buyer an offer on behalf of your buyer, you present it as if it was the best daggum offer that ever existed. Because you know what? That's your client's offer. That's how we old car, you guys. I got more to say about reasonable skill, care, and diligence, but we also need to take a break. So let's take 10, and then I'll have a Q&A time as well in just a second. But let's take 10, clear our minds, and we'll talk more about old car. Welcome back. The cameras are coming back on. And I can see you. Remember, it's twofold. So I am taking attendance. Let's say a little bit more about reasonable skill, care, and diligence. So we talked specifically reasonable skill, care, and diligence to the seller, reasonable skill, care, and diligence to the buyer. And then there's reasonable skill, care, and diligence to both, no matter if it's the buyer or the seller. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence says, I'm the expert of my market. What's that mean? I know what's going on with zoning. I know what's going on with NCDOT. And if I can't recite it off the top of my head, I know where to find it. I am the expert of my market. I know what's going on in the market that I choose to work. And I can use that to help my buyers and sellers through the transaction. Guys, the market is what it is. There's absolutely nothing I can do about it. But what I can do is understand it. And I can understand what it means to my sellers. I can understand what it means to my buyers. And I can assist them through this transaction by what the market is dictating to us right now. Remember a little bit ago, I said, you know, in 2020, our average days on market was like 4. Properties were flying off the shelves. Guess what? It's not 2020 anymore. Now it's 2025. What year is it? 2024. We're not in that market anymore. We're not in that extreme seller's market. I can't go back. There's nothing I can do about it, but I can know what's going on today to help my buyers and sellers through the transactions. So what if you don't? What if you say, no, I'm not doing reasonable skill, care, and diligence. They're on their own. Well, you could be found guilty by the Real Estate Commission of negligent or misconduct. The Real Estate Commission has the right to discipline your license. We're going to talk about the disciplinary action, I think at the end of this unit or in this unit somewhere. So we'll talk about that disciplinary action. If I don't perform reasonable skill, care, and diligence, I could be liable to my principal. You know, put real estate aside for a second. You can sue anybody for anything. All you got to do is find the right attorney, right? So if your principal feels that you've harmed them financially, can they sue you? Yeah. How far are they going to go? I don't know. I need you to call an attorney with your documentation. Head bobs, everybody heard me. Because what do we document? Everything. The court can fine you. The commission can reprimand your license, discipline your license. The court may decide that you may have to forfeit your commission. And then, of course, anything that violates license law and commission rule, LL and CR, license law and commission rule. So what's the big deal? I mean, ta-da, here it is right here, you guys. So let's look at an example together, talking about reasonable skill, care, and diligence. And let's look at an example. Colin is a buyer's agent. He gets a request from his buyer to see a property that is 200 miles outside of the area he normally works. Yes or no? The question on the table is, can Colin show the property, assuming it's in North Carolina? Can he? Yeah. Should he? That is entirely up to Colin. If Colin is willing to do the work, if Colin is willing to learn that market, if Colin is willing to drive 200 miles one way, every time they want to see a property, the home inspection, all that stuff, if he is willing to do the work, yeah, as long as it's in North Carolina. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence says Colin needs to think about this. And if Colin's not, I mean, y'all, that's 400 miles round trip. That's a good chunk of your day right there, isn't it? If Colin's not willing to do the work, the best thing Colin can do for his client is refer them to an agent in that area, in that market. You'll get a referral fee. A referral fee is better than a disciplinary action. Referral fee is better than a court case. Can we agree with that? Sometimes reasonable skill, care, and diligence allows me to know what I should tackle versus what I should refer to somebody else. Does that make sense? Just because you can doesn't always mean that you should. And that's what reasonable skill, care, and diligence teaches us. Commercial versus residential. Commercial is a totally different beast. You're familiar, I know residential in and out. I know very little about commercial. My bestie calls me and says she wants to buy a commercial building in High Point. Can I help her? Yeah. Should I? If I'm willing to learn the commercial market, if I'm willing to learn the commercial side of it. Everybody with me? If I'm not, then my best thing I might be able to do for my bestie is refer her to a commercial agent. If you're willing to do it, but the question is, are you willing to do it? Questions on OCAR. Make sure you have this written down. OCAR is what we owe the client. OCAR equals client. You get OCAR by hiring me, and you do so through the use of an agency agreement. Questions on OCAR? First class tickets. Good question comes in. Is the referral fee automatic or does it have to be agreed on? It has to be agreed on. So one thing we're going to learn is every firm can set their own fees. So we have to negotiate. We have to agree to that. There is no standard. So if OCAR is what we owe our clients, y'all have that written down? OCAR equals client, our first class tickets. There are also some duties that I owe my customers. Not as many, but remember, those customers are still on my plane. So I still owe them duties back in coach. What does a customer get from me? Customer gets honesty, fairness, and the disclosure of material facts. I never have a golden ticket to lie to somebody. I got to treat everybody fairly. And one thing, get used to me saying, is that we always have a duty to disclose material facts. I don't care who you're talking to. Are you talking to a client? Are you talking to a customer? We always have a duty to disclose material facts. Is there an exception to always? We always have a duty. I don't care who you're talking to. When it comes specific, and of course, more on material facts, we're getting there. Yeah, we'll get there today. That'll be exciting. So when we're talking to customers, this could refer honesty and fairness. This could refer to like verbally. This could refer to emails, texts. This could also refer to our advertising. So we need to make sure, because when I'm advertising somebody's home for sale, my client's the seller. And at this point, the world is my customer, right? I'm advertising this property to customers. So I need to make sure that my advertising is accurate. I need to make sure that my advertising is correct. And one thing to take into consideration when you're advertising, do you guys ever spend time reading remarks on listings? We like to use a lot of adjectives, right, to paint pictures of the property, describe the properties. A lot of agents now are using AI. which is fun because you read the remarks and you know the agent. You're like, I know there's no way this person talks like this. This had to be a computer that wrote these remarks, right? You can see. But with those advertising, we need to be aware of something called puffing. Puffing is just an exaggerated opinion. Puffing is very close to the fine line of lying or misrepresentation. So you just need to make sure when you're writing these descriptive ads, when you're letting AI write your remarks, you need to be sure that what you have in there is an opinion and not a misrepresentation. A misrepresentation is just a flat out lie. So we have this picture here. You can see we're down here at the coast, we're at the ocean. And you can see there's a vacant lot right here. And let's say you get a call to list this home. I would be very careful how you describe the view. Right now, it's an oceanfront view. Yes? What if somebody buys that lot and builds a house? Now, do you have an oceanfront view? No. It's a very fine line, you guys, but you need to make sure that your advertising is not a flat out misrepresentation. I would say something like across the street from the ocean. I would say something about like first or second row property, right? I would not say ocean view or ocean front. You guys getting started, you guys just learning the business, once you get affiliated, you're going to have a broker in charge that hopefully is reviewing your advertising with you before it goes out. Guys, we all know how the internet works, right? You hit submit and there it goes. And once it's out there in the World Wide Web, it's awfully hard to get it back. The more sets of eyes you can have on your advertising before you hit submit, the better. Let your broker in charge look at it. Let your spouse look at it. Let somebody else look at it. Because if they have an issue, there's a really good chance that somebody in the public, the general public, could have an issue as well, right? So the more sets of eyes you put on it, the better chance for accuracy we have. Again, more of that coming with your firm. So just making sure we're not representing that our property descriptions are accurate. You guys, I got a question for you guys. So why don't you go ahead and set your chats to private or direct message if they're not already? Just me, just sending me a chat. And in a private chat, please tell me A, B, C, or D. And this is I'd like to hear from everybody, please. If you don't know, say IDK. Yes. Everybody in? So it says all the following are fiduciary obligations except. How do we know fiduciary obligations? Fiduciary obligations are what we owe the client. And what does the client get? The client gets OLCAR, which is everything on this list except commission. Do they pay me? Yes, because we have an agency agreement saying that they will do so. Is me getting paid the number one, the top priority in this transaction? No, because agency ain't about me. Agency is about them. And what do I owe them? obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable skill, care, and diligence. That's what, that's okay. That's what agency teaches us. That's what OLCAR is about. What questions do I have about client, customer, OLCAR, the plane? Yes. Kiana.
Um, what's another word for diligence?
For what?
Diligence.
Duty, responsibility.
Okay.
All right. Client customers behind us. Please review it, have an understanding. And guys, let me tell you something about agency. And again, you may hear me say this a couple times. If you just went through client customer and went, that's easy, I get it, you may not be doing it right. I need you to go back and review it. I need you to see it again and again. I need you to solidify it up here. So remember, your homework for every single class is to review where we've been and look ahead at where we're going. So please go back and spend time with client versus customer. See the distinction between the two. We refer to client versus customer the rest of our agency discussion. So we need that understanding of what that means. Switching gears just a bit, we're going to get into this deep dive of material facts. So before we look at material facts, let me just pause for a second. The definition of material facts, the broad definition of material facts, is any fact that a reasonable person would consider relevant. Reasonable person would consider relevant. Well, now, what in the heck does that mean? How do you define reasonable? How do you define relevant? The definition of material facts is too broad. Can we agree with that? So what the Real Estate Commission has done is they've taken that broad definition and they have broken it down for us into specifics. And those specifics are what you're looking at on the top of page 143. Material facts are defined as the facts about the property itself, structural issues, plumbing issues, electrical issues. The basement floods every spring. It is something about the property itself that could affect somebody's decision. Something to take into consideration. Remember, properties are sold as is. The seller doesn't have to fix it. The seller doesn't even have to disclose it. So what's one way we protect the buyer? I have this duty to disclose. Once I learn about something about the property. And I think there's a difference in a wonky ceiling fan blade versus electrical issues. Guys, understand this. All homes have issues. All homes have something wrong with them. Brace yourself. There is no such thing as a perfect home. They all have problems. I'm not telling you to buy or not buy this house because of the problems. I'm just telling you what the problems are. Once I learn about facts about the property itself, I'm going to disclose that. Material facts are also facts relating directly to the property. Proposed zoning amendment, NCDOT widening the road, school boards redrawing the lines. It's not on the property, but it affects the property, doesn't it? So being the experts of our market, knowing what's going on around the property and knowing where to go to find that information. Again, you don't have to memorize this stuff. but we need to know where to go to find it so we can discover those material facts that relate directly to the property. Material facts are facts relating directly to the ability of the principal to complete the transaction. I think this is the one that's the hardest for us to grasp because, and I get it, totally get it. We just talked about how I owe my client confidentiality. I don't share their secrets with anybody, right? But now I'm telling you, I have a duty to disclose if they can't close. Think about it. If your principal can't close, doesn't that affect the other side? Let's say, for example, you're working with the buyer and we find out after we go under contract that your buyer's not going to get loan approval. If they don't get loan approval, that means they don't get the money. If they don't get the money, they can no longer buy the property. Doesn't that affect the seller? It's a material fact. What if we go under contract? This has happened. And the seller loses the property to foreclosure. I think they thought they were going to sell it before it foreclosed, but the timeline didn't work out for them. And so we're under contract and they lose the property to the bank. Doesn't that affect the other side? So the reason, and be careful when you see this, I still owe them confidentiality. But if I find out they can't complete the transaction, that affects the other side, and that's a material fact that I have to share. And then the fourth material fact here, if it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. If it's important to my seller, then it's important to me. Material facts. Now, I'm not running around blabbing specific importance, but I do have a duty to make sure that that end use is met. Material facts they've been a big deal the last, I don't know, 4-6 years in our continuing education classes. I'll talk to you guys more about that. But something that came up in a CE class a couple years ago that really even got me thinking. What if your buyer calls you or you're talking to your buyer and you find out that they have a severe allergy to dogs and they can't live in a home that had dogs there? Do you now have a material fact on your hand? Do you now have a duty when they say, I want to go see 123 Main Street, to contact the seller or the listing agent and find out if they have dogs? Do you have a duty now? Yeah. Don't say, oh, don't worry about it. You can clean it. You can clean the carpets and it'll be fine. If it's important to them, then it's important to me. Once they share something of specific importance, it becomes a material fact to me, and I have a duty to help them find that information. How about a lesser scale? I had buyers once, and she looked at me and she said, I have large dining room furniture. My dining room table is always set for 10, 4 on each side, 2 on the end. I have a china cabinet and a credenza. My new home needs to have a dining room large enough to hold my dining room furniture. Did I have a material fact? It was important to her. So does that make it important to me? Absolutely. Absolutely. We've got to learn. We've got to, and look, if you don't tell me, I can't help you, right? It's only what they share with me. This is why it's important, especially with buyers, that we spend some time talking to them, that we know what it is that is specific importance to them. And same thing with sellers. So these are things, kind of the breakdown of the material facts. We're going to get a little bit more in this in just a second, but I want to go away from the PowerPoint for a second. I want to go to the book, page 143. And the paragraph right there under the bullet points, just make a little note, kind of circle that paragraph, because there are some things in North Carolina that are always considered a material fact. Like, you don't have to ask yourself, is this a material fact? The commission has already decided that there are some things that will always be a material fact. They took the guesswork out of it. So first off, if a residence has ever been clad in ephes, also known as synthetic stucco, Stucco is an exterior siding. It looks like concrete. Stucco we usually associate with like our Spanish style homes. It's real rough. It looks like your driveway. Synthetic stucco then is fake stucco. If the property ever had synthetic stucco, it's very likely that it leaked and water got behind it, which sat on the wood. So now we could be dealing with mold, wood rot, all that good stuff. Even if it's been reclad, even if it's been fixed, it will always remain a material fact on the property. We're having these conversations with sellers. We're asking them. We'll talk more about that in just a second. Something else that will always be considered a material fact. If the property's polybutylene pipes are a type of plumbing pipe and they're cheap. I don't know another way to put that. They're cheap pipes. Sometimes builders put it in to save costs. They're white pipes with blue letters on it or red letters on it, and they just look like cheap plastic pipes. Once those pipes have leaked, it will always be a material fact. Even if the whole house has been replumbed, once they've leaked, if they haven't leaked, they're not a material fact yet. But once they've leaked, they'll always be a material fact. And then the last thing there is if the home was ever the site of a meth lab, that will always be a material fact. Now, I'm not suggesting y'all sit at your listing appointment and say, so have you guys ever cooked meth in here? No, don't do that. Don't do that. But what if you find out? What if they've had the tenant in there for the last 12 years and the tenant got arrested for cooking meth? Has there been meth in the home? Guys, meth doesn't like go away. You know what I'm saying? It like soaks into the walls, the floors, the ceilings. If we find out, we have to disclose. Somebody told me, I don't know how they know, but somebody told me once that if you walk into a home and it smells like a nail salon, little red flag to go up that there might have been some meth cooking there. That's what we're doing, is looking for. I don't know how they know. I didn't question it, but that's kind of what those little red flags that we're looking for. Again, we can argue it all day, but the commission says if you come across it, that will be a material fact. You don't have to ask yourself, is this material? If you come across it, the answer is yes, it is.
Could you say the name of the pipes again? I didn't get to write it down.
It's on page 143, polybutylene. Only when they've leaked. So, better understanding the things that are material facts. Back to the broker. What does this mean? When I come across a material fact, I have a duty to discover and disclose. Listen to me. Not diagnose. My job is to look for the little red flags, to know when I may have a material fact prompting me to ask questions, prompting me to learn more. When I see a material fact, I'm going to say, hey, look, there's a stain on the ceiling indicating that something leaked. And the buyer's going to say, well, what leaked? I don't diagnose. Unless you're a roofer or a plumber, I can't tell. Y'all notice I didn't even say water stain. I just said stain. What did I do when I pointed to the ceiling and said stain? I disclosed. Where did that stain come from? I don't know. Let's bring in the roofer to find out. Let's bring in the plumber to find out. As soon as you say water stain from plumbing, you've gotten out of your lane. You acted like a plumber. And unless you're a licensed plumber, remember, you guys, my job is to disclose. My job is to tell. Please write this down. Do not diagnose. Stay in your lane. We always have a duty to discover and disclose. Discover means paying attention to those little red flags, asking questions, helping them get the information. Disclose means to tell. Yeah, Talia.
So when we bring in somebody to like diagnose something, who's paying for that?
Usually the buyer. It's part of
Oh,
their learning about the property. So discover and disclose any information that I find out. How did I find out? I don't care. Once you find something out, do I know now? Yep. You know, what if the neighbors love to talk? Oh my gosh. Showing property. I kind of, I hate to say I hate it. The neighbor kind of pops up, yoo-hoo, you want to buy this house? I'm like, oh Lord, what's getting ready to fall out of her mouth next, right? Just because the neighbor walks over and says there's all these problems with the home, that's not like the end all be all truth, right? But it did cause my little red flag to go up, to tell me to investigate, to tell me to, neighbors know a lot, neighbors know nothing. But once they give me that little red flag, anything that could affect the principal's decision, and please, you guys, we always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts to all parties. I don't care who you are. Are you a client? Are you a customer? I don't care. We always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts. So let's kind of back up for just a second. And let's talk in practice for just a second. We have said so far, the seller doesn't have to disclose much. However, I have to disclose all material facts. Do we see a conflict of interest right out the gate from seller and broker? The seller, your listing appointment, and you're going around the home, and we're going to talk more about your listing appointment. Again, please bear with me. But you're going around the home with the seller. And before we start talking to the seller about the property, we need to let the seller know, look, you don't have to disclose, I do. So when we're going around the home, be careful what you tell me. Because once you say stain in the ceiling that I painted over, can I unhear that? Can I unknow that? This is broke, that's not working. Once you tell me, you don't have to disclose, but I do. Let the seller know they get to hide behind caveat emptor. But remember, OCAR says, I follow my seller's lawful instructions. So the seller may say, the roof leaks or the basement floods or the electrical is so short the next light switch is going to make this place blow up. The seller may tell you problems with the home. And then more than likely, they're going to follow that with, shh, don't tell anybody. But what does OCAR tell us? I follow their lawful instructions. Disclosing material facts is a commission rule that once you're licensed, you have to follow. Have these conversations with the seller up front. Before you start viewing the property, before you start discovering and disclosing all these issues, let the seller know your responsibility, your role. Again, we're going to talk about the listing appointment. We're going to get more into that in Unit 8. I'm telling you right now, material facts is probably one of our biggest conflict of interest with the sellers. And they're going to look at you and say, don't tell anybody. But we have to follow their lawful instructions. Everybody hear me? Yes, Kiana.
I was just going to say, so like, what if we was like showing her, or what if they was showing us the house and we see something that they don't talk about? Should we still like jot it down as a material fact to disclose it to our client?
Yep. If I see something, my little red flag went up, and my little red flag tells me I need to get more information. I need to ask questions. So when the seller says, okay, well, I won't show you anything. Can I walk into a room and see a stain on the ceiling? Even though the seller doesn't say there's a stain there, I can see a stain there, right? And so I say, gee, there's a stain. Can I ask where that came from? And if they, well, I don't have to tell you. Okay, well, that's fine. But I still have to disclose stain. Everybody with me? Guys, as agents, when we go into a home, remember, I'm not the one buying this property. So I'm not going in there looking at would my family fit here? Is this a place I could see myself living? That's not my role. My role is to go into the home and look at ceilings, walls, and floors. It's those little red flags. You cannot hide your head in the sand and walk into a room and be like, nope, no problems here. Everything looks shipshape. When we walk into a room, we have to look. That's what our little red flag is doing. We are discovering, and then once we learn, we disclose. So when it comes to material facts, let's make sure we're good with this. There it is in writing. We always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts to everybody. Y'all tired of me saying that yet? Don't be, because I'm not done. We always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts. I can't avoid responsibility by using disclaimers. I can't say something like, there's probably problems with this home, but you need to find them yourself. That's the discover and disclose piece. And then we constantly need to be on the lookout for those little red flags. I'm not diagnosing it, but I'm saying this doesn't look normal to me. This doesn't look like my home. Let's say, for example, you're on a listing appointment and you and the seller walk into the kitchen and you look around the kitchen and everything looks normal to you. And you ask the seller, are all appliances in working order? And the seller says yes. And my inexperienced eye doesn't see anything to cause a little red flag to go up. I'm going to take them at their word. Nothing caused a flag to go up for me. They told me everything worked. It's not like I'm going to say, well, I'll be the judge of that, run over and start turning on all the oven burners and the stove and everything, right? Like, let me make sure this refrigerator is working, right? If my flag doesn't go up and they tell me everything's fine, we're good to go. However, you walk in that kitchen, the seller says everything's fine, but you notice the oven door isn't secure. It's kind of cockeyed a little bit. I'm not an oven expert, but I know my oven at home doesn't look like that. I don't think you can bake a cake if you're letting heat out, right? That's not normal. And that's what we're looking for. That's what's causing me for that little red flag to go up. And I'm not diagnosing, it's just alerting me to the fact of this duty to discover, this duty to learn, so I can disclose. So let's look at an example. Carmen is a listing agent. She's performing a listing presentation for Keith. Keith is our seller. During Carmen's walkthrough of the property, she notices the stain on the ceiling, so she asks Keith about it. And Keith says, well, the roof it's leaked and it's been repaired 3 times, but it needs to be replaced. As a matter of fact, this is one of the reasons why I'm selling. I just don't want to deal with the roof anymore. And then he looks at Carmen and says, shh, don't tell anybody. I'll paint it again before you list it, so nobody will ever see it. Shh, don't tell anybody. Can Carmen follow these instructions from Keith? No, because now Carmen knows. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you learn about it, you can't unlearn about it. Honestly, Keith went wrong. Keith should have painted over that again before Carmen showed up. But now Carmen knows about it, and she has to disclose that there's an issue with the roof, despite Keith's instructions. We follow their lawful instructions. Yes, Talia. Oh, sorry, Melody. I'll get you in just 1 second. I saw Talia first.
Okay, great.
I know you said let your seller know, like before you do the walkthrough, like what you told me I had to disclose. But let's say they did say this, how would you personally go in telling them, like, I have to tell them, like I have to let people know?
I'm having that conversation before I walk around the home. So by the time we get to that stain, they already know I have to disclose it. We are going to sit down and explain to the seller this piece of the roll before I go into the home and start looking for stuff. Don't do it after the fact, because now your seller has left. You've made them feel like they can't trust you. So we're going to be upfront. We're going to be, guys, always remember, we are the professional in this transaction. So we're going to conduct ourselves as such, and we're going to put ourselves in a situation so they know what we're about. Thank you, Melody.
Yeah. So let's say that I have a potential lister with me. I go and I see an issue. They don't want to sign on with me then because they know I have to disclose. What if they go to a different agent in my firm? Do I tell that agent within my firm,
Now you know.
even
Now
though
you
I'm not working for them, but since my
Exactly,
firm
because
is?
remember, they hired the firm. All of you are representatives of the firm. So yeah, your coworker or either an agent in another firm. Maybe your sister works for another firm and you see she's got a listing, you're like, gee, I lost that listing. Why? Because I told him I have to. Once we know, we can't unknow. Seriously, you guys, this is the biggest conflict between seller and listing agent right here. And Melody, to your point, some people may say, I'm not going to hire you then. Guys, there are agents out there that'll do it wrong. You know what I see a lot in disciplinary action? Mishandling of material facts. So could it catch up to them one day? Absolutely. When you guys speed down the highway, do you get pulled over every single time you speed? You have the worst luck in the world. If you did, you probably wouldn't speed anymore, right? But you get pulled over sometimes when you speed. And that's what we're trying to prevent you from doing. Because once you're pulled over, disciplinary action, possibly being fined by the court. I'm trying to prevent you guys from getting pulled over. Just because you can doesn't mean that you should. Following license law and commission rules is how we don't get pulled over for speeding. Does that make sense? There are plenty of agents out there that will do it wrong. I'm not going to stand here and pretend that they're not. But guess what? When they get caught for speeding, now they got an issue. What's that old saying? It's not a problem until it's a problem. And now you got yourself a problem. Don't allow yourself to have a problem. What other questions do we have? This is good stuff, isn't it? What other questions do we have? I got a good source for you guys. I'll show you in just a second. I know right now material facts can get a little, so I got a good source. One thing, I just got to go back so I have somewhere to write. One thing that we're also on the lookout for are latent defects. And I type it out here because I know sometimes my little twang doesn't come out right. So a latent defect, this is something that's hidden and not obvious. There's a problem, but we can't see it. It didn't cause my red flag to go up. Let's say, for example, there's electrical issues behind this wall. I look at the outlet. I don't see anything burnt around it. I don't smell anything burnt. I don't know that there's an issue. I can't disclose what I don't know. We are not responsible for latent. Another word for latent is hidden. If you can't see it, if you can't smell it, if you can't taste it or whatever, then it's a latent defect. The only way I would know if there's electrical issues back here is if I show up with my crowbar and say, let me see what's up. And we're not responsible to do that. Now, if I walk in this room and the outlets have like little burn marks all around them and it smells a little like burnt, did your little red flag just go up? It's not latent. So keep that in mind. I got a great article for you guys from the commission that we'll look at in just a second. And it talks about how we know what is material fact or what is something that's latent. How can we decide the two? And it's just kind of a common knowledge. Again, what do things look like in your home? What do things look like in the homes you've been in before? So I'll point that article out to you in just a second. Everybody have latent written down. Latent just means something that's hidden, not obvious. And hear me, I can only disclose what I know. This doesn't negate my duty to discover. Again, we can't hide our heads in the sand and say, everything in this house looks ship shape, no problems. We've got to look, we've got to smell, we've got to put our red flags out there. Yes, Kiana. I think you're on mute.
Oh snap. So another another example for latent defect would be like a cabinet or like a shelf. If it looks put together, but it's like broken, like say if like you pull it out or something.
You can open the door and see it, right? So it wouldn't be hidden.
Oh, okay. Okay.
You open the door and all the cabinets are out, and the kitchen cabinet, and the right. That's you know, we got to look for these things. That's a great point. But yeah, it's got to be hidden, like behind this wall or under the carpet. Maybe there's mold on the subfloor, but the carpet's still on it, so we don't see it yet. We don't smell it. The only way to know for sure would be to jerk up the carpet. We're not going to do that. But if I walk in this room and smell something mildewy, I'm not gonna, it's not my job to figure out where it's coming from. Discover and disclose, not diagnose. So let me get out of here for 1 second. Before our break, I just want to show you guys, if we look at the online learning system, under the Julie folder is this article from the commission. And this is a great article, you guys. So I suggest, it's only 2 pages. I suggest taking time and reading this because it addresses this idea of common knowledge when we're looking for material facts. It helps us better understand our responsibility in it, what we need to know. So I do encourage you guys to look through this. I have it in here for a reason. And I think this is kind of one of the burning questions on most of our minds right now. How do I know to disclose it? And bottom line, you guys, if it doesn't look normal to you, then that caused our little red flag to go up. That caused us to find out more so I can disclose the issue. So please take just a few minutes this weekend and read this article, having a better understanding of what is that common knowledge. It talks about latent effects, that kind of good stuff. We're going to take our break. When we come back, we're going to talk about how we can get in trouble for material facts. We know we have to disclose, but how can we get in trouble if we don't or if we do it wrong? So that's coming up. Prohibited conducts with material facts in 10. We are back. How are we holding out? Is this good stuff? Not bad so far, right? One more hour, of course. I mean, I say we talk about what we leave before each class, but guys, we'll be in Unit 7 all next week. We may start on 8, but it would be like late on Thursday. So when you're looking ahead and reviewing this weekend, it is all about Unit 7. Head Bobs, you just heard what I said. It's a big unit. Have I gotten that across? All right, so I am taking attendance. And jumping back in. So prohibited conduct, so prohibited acts revolved around material facts. In other words, if you mishandle a material fact, what could happen to you? And before we look at this prohibited conduct, I first want to take a few steps back. I'm going to go off book for a second. And I want to take a few steps back and just define some words. And once we define some words, then we're going to do a mashup. But first, let's just go off book and define some words. Couple words to understand. Misrepresentation is a lie. You put false information out there. Did you do it verbally? Did you do it in a text or an email? Did you do it in your advertising? I don't care. A misrepresentation is a lie, false information. An omission is failing to disclose. If you omit something, you kept your mouth shut. You did not disclose it. If something is done willfully, it's done intentionally, it's done on purpose. If something is done negligently, was unintentionally, it was an accident, you didn't mean for it to happen, but guess what? It still did. Before we look at our prohibited conduct, let's just take a step back real quick. Which one do you think is a worst act? A willful act or a negligent act? And you can tell me W or N in the chat. I know what you speak of. Which one do you think is worse, willful or negligent?
Willful.
Somebody says willful. I'm seeing willful come up in the chat, and I agree with you guys 100%. Guys, we're all human. Do y'all ever make mistakes every once in a while? Sometimes, some of us more so than others. I mean, it's like, how many mistakes have I made so far today? Right? I mean, right? We're human, you guys. Our commissioners are also human. We all make mistakes. Negligence happens. Willful means you did it deliberately. You did it intentionally. So I think a willful act is definitely more, negligent, maybe. So now that we've defined some words, on the bottom of page 143, we start talking about the prohibited conduct. We do a mashup of the words that we just learned. And with the prohibited conduct, I call these the big four. If you are mishandling, if you are mistreating a material fact, it's because it's one of the big four. You can either lie about it or omit it. And then the question is, did you do it willfully or negligently? If you see this on, no, let me rephrase that. When you see this on a test, it's going to give you a scenario. And it's going to ask you, which of the big four, which of the prohibited conducts did this agent, this broker conduct? And I think you guys should first stop as you're going through that scenario and ask yourselves, did they lie or did they keep their mouth shut? Was it a misrepresentation or an omission? Once you determine that, then go back through the scenario and ask yourselves if they did it on purpose or on accident. So with the big four, and we're going to break all these down and talk about them. Yes, Kiana.
Oh, I was just gonna say, which one is the lie one?
Misrepresentation.
Okay. And what's the omission one?
You omitted it.
Oh, omitted it. Okay.
You didn't disclose it.
Okay.
So let's take these each and break them down. First up, willful misrepresentation. The licensee has actual knowledge. Do you know? Yeah. Actual knowledge of material fact and deliberately misinforms. You know, and you lie. You could be guilty of willful misrepresentation. You know. How do you know? Because you have actual knowledge. And then you turn around and lie. Willful misrepresentation. We got examples. We got lots of examples of these. You know, and you lie. A seller's agent is aware that the present owners of the listed property have had serious problems with electrical wiring. Nonetheless, the broker tells a prospective purchaser that all mechanical systems are in excellent condition. This broker will probably be guilty of willful misrepresentation. They know and they lie. Everybody see it? Oh yeah, everything's fine. There's no issues. Liar, liar, pants on fire. You know, and you lie. Willful misrepresentation. Negligent misrepresentation is still a lie, but it was unintentional. Maybe you don't know. Maybe you received incorrect information. Maybe you just made a mistake. Mistakes happen. When you make a mistake, fix it, correct it, make it right. Negligent misrepresentation. You don't know, but you could have found out. It's still a lie, but it's negligent. It was done unintentionally. Now, let me talk about this word negligent for just a second. When it comes to negligent acts, one thing that the commission is going to perform is called the reasonable standards test. And the reasonable standards test is going to say, could a reasonable broker have known? Let's say it was information about zoning. There's a zoning amendment on the table. And you look at somebody and say, oh, no zoning whatsoever. The commission goes to the zoning board and finds it online. Are they going to determine that you could have found out? If they can Google it and find it, doesn't it stand to reason they suspect that you could have too? The reasonable standards test asks the question, could they have found out? Negligent acts are usually not as severe as willful, as all of you just indicated in the chat, but I'm not saying you're off the hook. Again, they're going to ask themselves, could you have found out? And this takes us back to burying your head in the sand. You walk in this room and say, no, everything's fine. The commission's going to ask, could they have looked around and seen the stain on the ceiling and the crack up the wall? And could you have found out? Negligent misrepresentation. You lied. You didn't mean to, but guess what? You still did. You still put false information out there. So you're viewing a property in a subdivision. The buyer tells their agent they want to build a large storage building in the backyard and asks, would that be okay? Buyer's agent calls the listing agent. The listing agent says, well, everybody else in the subdivision have a storage building, so I'm sure it's fine. Nobody checked the covenants. Just because you see a storage building, the only thing you know by looking at a storage building is that somebody put a storage building there. Just because everybody else has a storage building, you don't know if they're currently in the throes of the battle with the HOA to have that storage building taken down. Maybe they're being fined X amount every day that storage building is up. The only thing you know when you see a storage building is that somebody put it there. That doesn't mean it's okay per the HOA. Both brokers went wrong. The buyer's agent for not verifying, for not pulling the covenants and sharing with their buyer. The listing agent for saying, oh yeah, everybody else is, you can too. Both, I bet you the buyer's agent would be bigger. But the question is, they lied, right? They lied. But the question is, could they have found out? And the answer is yes. Pull the covenants, help them see whether or not a storage building is allowed. This takes me back to another super simple philosophy. When in doubt, find out. Do the research. Guys, we can look at somebody and say, I don't know, let me get back to you. That is a perfectly acceptable answer. Don't answer for the sake of answering. So misrepresentation is a lie. Willful means you do it with knowledge, you lie with knowledge. Negligent, unintentional, but it still happened. Then we have willful omission. You have actual knowledge, but you fail to disclose. What's it mean to disclose? To tell. You know, but you kept your mouth shut. You didn't tell a prospective purchaser or seller for that matter. You didn't tell a client or customer. You kept your mouth shut intentionally. You know, but you didn't disclose. Seller's agent is aware that the listed property has suffered extensive termite that is not easily detectable. Maybe it's in the deep, dark corner of the crawl space. Regardless, I don't care how you know, but you know, regardless of whether a prospective purchaser actually inquires about it, does not negate my duty to disclose. This isn't a don't ask, don't tell kind of thing. We know, how did you know? Maybe the seller told you. You know that there was termite damage. Those little buggers can do some damage to a property. Let me tell you what. And it's not like the buyer is going to be able to look and be like, oh yeah, there's termite damage. It's not easily detectable, but you know. That's not this isn't a don't ask, don't tell. Just because the buyer didn't specifically say, is there termite damage, does not negate my responsibility to disclose. We always have a duty to disclose material facts, whether they ask or not. And then the last one of the big four is negligent omission. You do not have actual knowledge, but you could have found out. Again, would a reasonable broker, what this is saying is your little red flag went up and you ignored it. You kept your head buried in the sand. You chose to pretend that you didn't see or hear or smell. You could have found out, but you chose not to. Negligent omission. We've got to address those little red flags. We've got to be on alert, pay attention to, and when they do pop up, we've got to address it. So you're viewing a home in February to list it. You're wanting to list it. The house is cold. You're sitting in this listing appointment with your coat and scarf and hat and gloves, and you're shivering a little bit, but you don't ask about it. If you're sitting inside in February freezing to death, does your little red flag go up? It should. That's not how normal people live, right? Normal people turn the heat on in February. As it turns out, there's a reason why you're cold. The heat pump is inoperable. Buyer buys without being informed. Listing agent could be guilty of negligent omission because they could have asked, oh, it's cold in here. Does the heat work? Now, the question I get a lot with this is, why didn't the buyer's home inspector tell them that the heat doesn't work? Not all buyers, it's not a requirement. Some buyers choose not to get the home inspection. It's highly recommended, but it's not required. We're going to talk about the home inspection when we talk about the buyer's contract to closing process. But just addressing that right now, for whatever reason, it looks like to me that this buyer chose not to have a home inspection. The agent didn't acknowledge their red flag. Same thing if you go in a house in August and the AC is not working. You gonna ask questions? Is your flag going up? Maybe they're just frugal and they're trying to save money. I don't know until I ask. Everybody with me? This is addressing those little red flags. Do not ignore. You know that little voice way deep down inside you? That's what we're listening to, that red flag. Goodness, it's cold in here. I wonder why. We've got to get comfortable with asking. And guys, I always remind you, because I know this is new to a lot of us, but I always remind you that we are the professionals in this relationship. Not the seller, not the buyer, but us, the broker. So we are the ones that are leading this charge. We are the professionals in this relationship. So with the big four, turn with me, if you will, in your book, page 144. (144) talks about willful misrepresentation, and then you have some examples. Everybody see that? 144 talks about negligent with some examples on 145. 145, willful omission with examples. Negligent omission with examples on 146. I draw your attention to the examples because I think those are the best ways to help us wrap our brains around the big four. So we can study the definitions all day long, but I think the examples kind of offer us an in practice piece of it. And again, as you're going through these, ask yourselves, did the agent lie or did they keep their mouth shut? Did they do so willfully or did they do so intentionally? Question comes in, homes with window units, those are like for AC. Yeah, those are okay. As long as we have some kind of cool, and you may have homes without AC. AC is not a requirement. It's a luxury. We'll talk about that in Unit 8. What I'm saying is, gee, it's August and it's hot. I'm going to ask some questions. They say, well, we don't have AC. Cool. Now I know my answer. You with me? So the examples I think are more helpful. When you guys see things like on page 146 and it says in practice, as you guys are going through your books, the in practice is the real world piece of it. And I think that's helpful too, to help us understand the real piece. So the in practice, I need to introduce you guys to something. So I'm going to go off PowerPoint just for a minute. And we're going to go in the online learning system. And please note, I'm in the section that's called License Law and Commission Rules. And within License Law and Commission Rules, this is like the last section that we cover in this class. So it's going to be at the very end. Within License Law and Commission Rules, there is a License Law and Rule comments. When we get to this last section, most of what we do in this last section is on the comments. Reading license law is not a good time. Reading commission rule is not a good time. I'm not asking you guys to read law and rule. I am going to ask you guys to read the comments. So first off, thumbs up, we see where this is. License law and commission rule, and then there's a place called comments. And when we get to this section at the end, we're going to do a deep dive into this. We're going to spend time in this. I introduce this to you now, though, because I think you guys can start reading this. I think you can start. We're going to see a lot of things parallel to what we're talking about. Remember, how do we eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So we got 23 pages. I think if you guys start now, do it in small sections. By the time we get to the end, you will have covered it, so you've looked at it ahead and we can talk about it. The reason I bring up the comments now, because it starts talking about agency. It starts talking about agency disclosures, things that we're talking about in units 7 and 8. So it starts running parallel with our discussions. And if we scroll, this is page 2, this is page 3. On page 4, you can see we start talking about material facts in the comments. So you have it in unit 7. You also have it in the comments. And then on page 5, we define the big 4, and the comments offer you more examples. So you have examples in unit 7 on the big 4. You have examples in the comments. If you want to piecemeal it and just start working with that, working on the rest, I'm fine with that. But I do think you guys need to start looking at this. And again, you can download it. So if you want to save it as a PDF or print it, you're welcome to. But when we get to the end, the license law and commission rule, this is where most of that discussion will be on. So start now, and use those examples to help you better understand the big 4, the misrepresentations and the omissions. Comments on the comments?
Yeah, so with the comments, like, is that what we gotta tell the buyer and seller? As far as like the comments,
No,
or
the comments are just commenting on. Instead of having you read the law and the rule, they kind of make it easier, put it in verbiage. So it's comments on the law and the rule. It's not sitting down reading law, but it's a easier understanding of it.
okay.
And again, if you want to break it down, that's fine. But where we are right now, here's your big 4 with examples. So maybe you just start there. Maybe you just start with the material facts discussion, kind of work your way through. As you can see, I keep scrolling really fast. We're going to see some more examples. And then we got stuff like, here's our agency agreements and disclosure. We're getting into agreements. We're getting into disclosures. So a lot of this stuff parallels what we're talking about in unit 7 and 8. If I'm talking about it twice and I have 2 different sources on it, what does that mean to you? Yeah, little important. There's a reason for this, you guys. So hear me. Here's that heavily tested material again. Everybody good? Everybody know where to find this? If you log out and you don't remember, just shoot me an email. Please don't come back to me in 2 months and say, yeah, I didn't know where that was. I can't help you if I don't know. I'm good at a lot of things, but reading your mind is not one of them. I wish. Well, maybe. I don't know. I don't know if I want to know what some of y'all think. You know what I'm saying? But my mind reading abilities are weak. So if we log out and you say, where was that? Just shoot me an email. Fair enough? Everybody good? Ish? So we have, yes, perfect. Somebody said Lane talked about the importance. So now you got Lane telling you it's important. You got Julie's telling you it's important. What you think about it? So we have talked about things that are considered material facts in North Carolina. Now we need to switch gears just a bit and talk about things that are not material facts. And what I mean by it not being a material fact is that I don't have to volunteer the information. I don't have to disclose it. However, listen to me. If I'm asked, I can't lie. I don't have to volunteer it, but if I'm asked, I never have a golden ticket to lie. So in North Carolina, there are 2 things that they have labeled specifically as not a material fact, meaning I don't have to volunteer the information. First, not material fact. The haunted house on the block. Any kind of stigmatized property, it's been branded by society as undesirable. Maybe it was the site of a major crime. Maybe it was a site of like some kind of murder suicide, some kind of mass suicide kind of thing. These stigmatized properties are not material facts, meaning when you list the haunted house on the block, you don't have to disclose that it was stigmatized. However, if you're asked and you know, you can't lie. I'm going to tell you guys something right now. You won't show many properties. You won't be at this long before you have a buyer ask you, did anybody ever die in this home? You don't have to show many properties before that you come across that. If you know, you've got to answer that honestly. But what if I don't know? Isn't I don't know an honest answer? If you know, you have to be truthful. You have to be honest. If it's, some people will refuse to live in a home if they know that somebody died in it. And so if that's the case, and guys, think about it. They're not asking me if anybody of the previous owner died. They want to know if anybody ever died in it. And we may not be able to address that. You know, this could be a home of somebody that you know, and you know when they lived there that nobody died. But what if somebody, the previous owner, had died in the home? Are you guys with me? So be very, very careful how you answer that. What we need to understand is I don't have to volunteer it, but if I'm asked, I can't lie. Yes, Talia.
Was the people on the sex offender list, was that a material fact or not a material fact?
I'm getting there next.
Oh, okay.
Some sellers will choose to disclose. You guys, some of these crimes are public knowledge. Sometimes these things make the news. Sometimes they make the national news if it's really good, right? So now we're back to the neighbors. Yoo-hoo, did you know that this was the site of a serious crime, a serious conviction? People can find out. Go to Google, type in the address. If it made the news, it'll pop up, won't it? Let your buyers learn about it. Let your buyers investigate. I do have one exception to this rule. If you're ever asked if anybody ever lived in the home that had AIDS or HIV, your answer is always federal fair housing prohibits me from answering that. I'll say that again. Everybody ready? Federal fair housing prohibits me from answering that. Those with AIDS and HIV are a protected class under federal fair housing. Federal fair housing is Unit 19. I don't care if you know or not. Maybe you knew the owners and you knew nobody in that home had AIDS or HIV. Our answer is always federal fair housing prohibits me from finding that. And yeah, if this, somebody said you can find out, we can go to Google, we can do our research. If it's important to your buyer, then it's important to me. Help them find out, but just be careful about guarantees, right? Oh, I went to Google. Guys, I haven't, but I have had coworkers, peers that have had buyers when we're under contract want to bring the priest over to check the vibes, check the juju of the home. Guess what? If it's important to them, then when can we get the priest over to check it out? Everybody with me? Don't look at them and say, oh, don't worry about that. Good juju, I get it. If it's important to them, then it's important to me. Yes, Kiana.
So I was just gonna say, you said the federal law prohibited something like that. So when they say prohibited, that means like we can't
Correct.
share it.
You're prohibited from answering that question. Yes or no? Your answer is federal fair housing prohibits me, does not allow me to answer that question.
Oh, okay, okay.
Not a material fact. I can disclose it, but I'm not required to. I don't have to volunteer the information. I never have a golden ticket to lie. Another thing that's not a material fact in North Carolina is the presence of convicted sex offenders nearby. There are a couple things about this that we need to discuss. First off, the word says convicted. Convicted means they've been caught and charged. Everybody with me? The gavel has come down and the judge has said guilty. You are guilty of some sex offender activity. Convicted sex offenders, per Megan's Law, have to register their address. They have to let Megan's Law, they have to let the sex offender registry website, they have to list their address. The buyers and tenants that are asking you about this are those that come with children. And they may ask you, are there any convicted sex, are there any sex offenders nearby? They're only on the registry if they've been convicted. Unfortunately, not all have been caught yet, right? So if you say no, you're saying there are none convicted or not. When it comes to this one, I'm a big fan of being the source of the source. So instead of trying to address this, instead of trying to answer this, send them to the sex offender registry website. Have them put the address in. You're not going to find many areas that don't have a convicted sex offender. The question is that buyer's tolerance level? The other thing to understand, you guys, is we just said convicted sex offenders can and do move. So you may not have a convicted sex offender living nearby today, but that doesn't mean one can't move in tomorrow. So again, by sending them to the website, letting them do their research, this is something that they can keep an eye on, that they can watch. But I'm a big fan of letting them do their own research, because they got to determine what they're comfortable with, what their tolerance level is. Bottom line, especially when we move into a new neighborhood, let's know who our kids are with. Let's know where our kids are and who they're with until we know if we're makes sense. Don't be responsible for ensuring the safety of your buyer. Send them to the website, let them do their own research, and understand that they can and move. They can and do move. Yes, Talia.
So I don't in North Carolina, does it doesn't it prohibit them from like moving within a certain mile of like a school zone?
Convicted ones.
Yeah.
What about the ones that aren't caught yet? So you can't even look at the buyer and say, well, let's just move across the street from the school because you won't have any sex offenders there. I don't, there could be one living there that hasn't been caught yet, hasn't been charged. And that's where we got to be very, very careful. I can tell you there's none on the registry, but I can't tell you that none have been caught yet. Does that make sense? Because they're not asking about convicted. They're asking about sex offenders, period. And that's where that word convicted means a whole lot. This one kind of bumps on our moral compass a little bit, doesn't it? I get that. Remember, you don't have to volunteer it. And when you're asked, the most truthful answer I have for you is go to the sex offender registry website and check it out. That's the most truthful thing I know. Let them determine. I'll share with you guys, I took a continuing education class a couple years ago, several years ago, and we were talking about material facts, because we've been talking about that a lot lately in CE. And we were talking about material facts, and one of the guys in the class raised his hand, and he said that he was listing a property. He was at a listing appointment, and the seller said the guy across the street is a convicted sex offender. They know because they have the sex offender registry website. They know that. And the sellers had concerns about that. And they said, should we disclose that? And so the agent explained to him that it was not a material fact, that we don't have to volunteer that information. We can if we want to, but we don't have to. After discussion and back and forth, bottom line, the sellers chose to disclose. And I found that quite admirable, to be honest, because the sellers put themselves in buyers' shoes. And the sellers decided that they would want to know. So they chose to volunteer. This is another one. Don't hide your head in the sand. This is going to come up. And we just need to have the conversation with buyers and sellers, help them weigh out their options, help them understand what this is about, and then we can decide how you want to proceed. It did my heart good to know that there's still good people like that out there in this world. They could have harmed their power, right? But they chose to disclose. And like we said, there's a buyer for every property. But they chose to disclose the things that help restore our faith in people. We need that sometimes, don't we? So, not a material fact. Stigmatized property and sex offenders, again, hear me. You don't have to volunteer it. However, if you're asked, I never have a golden ticket to lie. Questions, not a material fact.
Only question I have is, oh well, I was going to ask you if your buyer was a offender, but they would have to list their address, so never mind.
That's a great question, Talia. What if your buyer is a sex offender, convicted sex offender? And that's where, exactly right, Megan's Law comes in, and maybe that just bumped on your moral compass so hard that you don't want to work with that buyer, right? If they tell you that, I mean, they have to tell you at the gate, right? We don't have to take all business that comes our way. If I don't want to work with this person, I can send them on. So, but there's nothing to disclose because they are the ones that are responsible per Megan's Law of registering their new address, whether they own it or rent it. I had that come up. I had a friend and they found out that somebody was wanting to buy in the neighborhood that was a convicted sex offender, and they were furious. How can I stop them from buying? Well, you can't. Well, that's not right. Whoa. Megan's Law doesn't say you can't buy or live here. Megan's Law just says that you have to register it. It's public knowledge and you have to register it. And guys, remember too, I mean, I'm not trying to downplay this, but anybody that's ever been tried will forever be a convicted sex offender. Even if the 18-year-old and the 17-year-old and daddy finds out, that 18-year-old will forever be a convicted sex offender. So don't jump to conclusions. Everybody with me? Really none of my business how you wound up on that list. My job is to be the source of the source and send them to the sex offender registry website. I have a feeling some of you will go there after class today. Have you looked up your own house? Have you looked up your own neighborhood? If you haven't, you may want to consider it. It might be eye-opening. Just Google North Carolina Sex Offender Registry. Please don't do it now. I would consider it a distraction. But make a note after class. Public knowledge. Somebody said it's scary. I agree. Don't do it now. All right, y'all still have your chat set to private? I got another question for you guys. Want to make sure you're ready first. Everybody ready? And take some time with this, and we're going to break it down because this is one of these that could be up for debate. But just take a second and think about it. Let me know in a private chat, A, B, C, or D, and yes, we will talk about it, each of it. Anybody in? So this is a good question that kind of gets us thinking about latent things. And I get why this question is confusing, because we see things and we know about it because we read it in the question. So this is a good kind of put yourself in practice, put yourself in the scenario. So let's break these down and see what we think. Which of the following would likely be considered a material fact requiring disclosure by a broker in a sales transaction? So A, we have improper drainage that is resulting in below ground movement, not yet visible. Not yet visible tells us that it's latent. The only reason you know about it right now is because you just read it in the question. Does that make sense? If you were standing in this house in the real world, this would be a latent effect. So we can't disclose A, I don't know about it. B says water intrusion in the basement that has remained hidden. Again, the only reason you know there's water intrusion is because you just read it in the question. Does that make sense? So when we see these, I need you to see these words, not yet visible, remained hidden. That's telling us that these things are latent. That's telling us that we don't see these things. Seller has been notified that the HOA is adding sidewalks, resulting in an assessment. Seller will pay in full before closing. So what responsibility does the buyer have about this? Nothing. It's a done deal by the time they move in. Nothing to disclose. It's already done. Seller finished the basement without a permit. Remember, we learned in Unit 5 that unpermitted space is a material fact. Once we learn that the space was finished without a permit, I have to disclose it. And again, we have to ask. A lot of basements are unfinished. So when you're touring this home and you see this newly finished basement, your red flag goes up. Gee, this is nice. Did y'all just do this? You did. Did y'all get permits? We've got to ask. This is not the time to be shy. We've got to ask. They say, oh yeah, we did it ourselves. It was a project. We had a great time doing it. We finished this entire basement. The next question out of your mouth needs to be, did y'all pull permits? And if they say no, I can advertise the basement, but I've got to disclose that it was unfinished. I'm sorry, unpermitted. Yeah, Kiana?
Why do basements need a permit?
Because you're dealing with plumbing, electrical, structural. You're messing with permits or permission to do. So if you're going to take that concrete basement or that dirt basement and turn it into a finished space with ceilings, floors, and walls, you need permit.
Oh, okay. Is it like that with every basement?
If you're doing major work,
Okay.
permits are required.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So if the seller was like knocked before they moved out, they like knocked the wall down to have like an open flow, do they need a permit for that?
Whenever you're messing with structural, electrical, and plumbing, they say you need. So when you're knocking a wall down, and remember, there's we gave you that general statute back in Unit 5 that answers the question, do I need a permit? And I'm just going to reference you. But big picture, when you mess with structural, electrical, and plumbing, a permit is required. All right, here is another question for you guys. Tell me in a chat again, A, B, C, or D. And note, you guys, this starts getting us into the verbiage. Note, this is the selling agent, which is referring to the one that's working with let me see your mouse move, the buyer. You are selling it to the buyer. The ing is the verb. So we got the selling agent, the buyer's agent must disclose all the following to the seller except buyer's poor credit resulting in loan denial. And I just saw something that's going to make me go change this answer choice, because this is, when we talk about poor credit, this has come up before we ever show the property. When we're under contract, if we get loan denial when we're under contract, now I have to disclose it. But if they have poor credit, then we don't get pre-approval. We don't get pre-qualification for me to show them this property. I'm going to reword that question. Roof leak that was discovered during the inspection, is that a material fact if the roof leaks? Is that something of importance? Yep, I got to disclose that. Proposed zoning amendment, does this affect the property? If they change the zoning, then it could have changed the value nearby. Absolutely. What do we keep to ourselves? How high is your buyer willing to go? That's the old car piece of it. Buyer says, we saw this house for 200,000. I'll make an offer for 180, but I'd be willing to go up to 190. Are you sharing that with the seller? No, because what's the seller going to say? I'm going to counter at 190, right? You're harming their negotiating power. We're getting more and more into that. Again, I just saw that in A, that the way that's worded, it may not be the best. So I do apologize for that. I will fix it. But if we have poor credit, we're not getting pre-approval to go show the property. Pre-approval happens before